When civilians need help, they call the police. When the police need help, they call the Emergency Service Unit.
Police emergency service workers are being credited with saving a woman's life.
New York cops in full combat regalia.
CNN, there are reports of an explosion possible.
You usually see me use that introduction when we have former bosses in ESU who've been on, as you know by now, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, so on and so forth. But I think given the special nature of tonight's show and the first of its kind in this miniseries, I wanted to really bust that particular introduction out. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 320 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Like I said, it's a very special one, and it's bound to be an emotional one. Volume 46 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was volume 59. Of the best of the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. And Chief Joe DiBernardo, who finished up as a deputy chief in the FDNY, joined me for that one. 35-year veteran of the FDNY, came on in 1966, left in 2001. And there is someone that not only had a distinguished career, but dealt with so much loss in his personal life. Of course, if you know, his son was Lieutenant Joseph DiBernardo of Rescue 3, who was critically injured in the Black Sunday fire of 2005 and died 6 years later of complications. So we talked about not only his experiences, but running a foundation in his son's memory and all the good work that that's done. And of course, highlighting the great firefighter in person his son was. So, you know, this has been really a great week for the show. We're bound to have an inspiring show tonight. We had an inspiring show Wednesday. We'll just run a couple of ads real quick. And on more of a lighthearted note, briefly, I come to you a very happy Knicks fan. So there was a cardiac event last night. I need a cardiologist currently, but the boys, shout out to them, they got it done, even though they took 10 years off my life in the process. They were able to win against Philadelphia. And the Rangers, of course, begin their second round series Sunday night. Get a little bit of a break before my heart attacks come again. So let's run a couple ads and let's not keep our guests waiting too long. And the first thing is, of course, MC Media Editing Services. Need advice on how to start your podcast? Frustrated with the editing process? Can't find a voiceover guy? Hi, I'm Mike Colón, and I'm here to help. I'm the owner and founder of MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company for all things media, where I can offer you consulting advice on how to get started, and once you get started, editing, as well as voiceover work, all for a very reasonable price. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at 917-781-6189 or the email that you see listed here. I'm always available, and I'm always willing to help. Again, 917-781-6189. Why go to some giant consulting firm that's going to charge you an arm and a leg when you can just come to me? If you want to be stress-free, the way to go is to call MC. MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company. The more I see that ad for those of you watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter, the more I realize how ridiculous I look, but whatever. On that note, you know who's not ridiculous? If you need a PI, Billy Ryan's the best in the business. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Thanks to Billy, and he's in the chat already. It's good to see you, as always, my friend. So as I said, this show is supposed to be a very emotional one. It's a different one, but I think it's important. So Kaylin Langone is the daughter of Thomas Langone. We'll bring her on momentarily, but just to briefly paint the picture on who her father was, and she'll do a much better job than I ever could of painting it as we go along tonight. Tommy Langone was simply a man committed to service in multiple facets. He was involved in fire rescue out on Long Island with the Roslyn Fire Rescue, and in the 80s joined the NYPD, 1984 to be specific, and in 1991 ended up in the Emergency Service Unit, specifically in Truck Number 10. And on September 11th, 2001, responding from Truck 10 in Queens, he answered the call, as everyone in the NYPD, FDNY, Port Authority Police, EMS did. And unfortunately, 23 NYPD officers would perish that day. 14 of them were from the emergency service unit, and one of them was Tom. But this is an important show in that it paints the picture of not only who he was as a police officer or as a fireman and later on fire chief, but who he was as a person. I can't think of anyone better to do that than his daughter, and that is Miss Caitlin Langone, who joins us for a very special edition of Volume 46 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit, a tribute to Tom Langone. Kate, welcome. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the honor and a very well said introduction for my dad.
Oh, no problem. No problem. And Billy Neese, who did not work with your father directly in ESU, but worked with him in the volunteer fire side. Billy later went on to the bomb squad in the NYPD, says the best, was chief with him in the volleys. So he knew your father quite well. And your husband's here as well. He says, that's my wife. So
Yep, downstairs in the basement, commenting.
Good to see you. So again, like I said to you in the pre-show, this is your show, girl. This is your story to tell. I'll sit in the back and you paint the story on Tom Langone.
Right. So I think the way that you summed up my father's life being a life of service is a very accurate one. I like to think that the unofficial motto of my clan of Langones would be, to live to serve. So my grandfather was actually, I think, my father and my uncle's inspiration for joining the fire service. Specifically, my grandpa Paul was in the Roslyn Rescue Fire Department for many years. He eventually became chief, and pretty much and legitimately, I believe, as soon as my father turned 18 in 1980, he joined the Roslyn Rescue Fire Department. My uncle Peter is about 2 years older than Dad, and he had already joined. And we have a lovely photo at home of the three of them in their dress blues. So my aunts actually volunteered at the fire company for a little while as ambulance drivers. They both became nurses. My mother's a nurse. We Langones, we like to help. So I think that was a very accurate way of saying things. And, it just seemed volunteer firefighting was not quite enough for him. I had the privilege of going through his high school yearbook from 1980. And interestingly enough, in there, they had a segment for the seniors that was, interestingly, again, titled Last Will and Testament. So kind of a weird foreboding statement there. But under that statement, under Tom Langone, it says become a SWAT officer, which I think he achieved that dream and more. So yeah, 1980, we're in the Roslyn Rescue Fire Department. And then by 1989 or so, he actually became the chief of the entire department. He was around 24, 26 at the time, which when I think back at myself as 24 or 26, I cannot imagine leading an entire squad of people in such emergent situations, but that just kind of speaks to the man that he was and the motivations he had. So he was chief for several years there. In 1987, he decided to join Jamaica Hospital as an EMS provider there as well, just kind of getting all the ground experience he possibly could. And then, as you had mentioned, he did take both civil service exams, FDNY and NYPD. NYPD just happened to snatch him up first. So did the academy, then, as you mentioned, 1984, he graduates. He is appointed to Neighborhood Stabilization Unit 15. Then he makes his way to the 4-5, where he works in anti-crime for a little bit. There's a very hilarious picture of him in some very 80s short shorts doing anti-crime in the Bronx in one of the NYPD plotter magazines. I was just like, oh my goodness. You can tell he's an Irish man. He's very white. And then he makes his way into the 103. And by 1991, he achieves his high school dream, becomes a member of ESU and stationed in Truck 10 with Sergeant Hargrove, God rest his soul, and a couple other knuckleheads, Stephanakis, Winwood, Glenn Klein, Mike McKenna, and send some guys who would become good lifelong friends for him. Then I had a lovely opportunity to speak to Mr. Mike Carr and discover that in 92 or 93, he was selected to join FEMA when they were building up the task force. And a little just rundown of his life of service here. So by 95, they're called to mobilize Oklahoma City. He goes to a couple of hurricanes. Still not enough for the man. He loves to work. So in 1995 or about 1996, he joins the Fire Service Academy in Nassau County on Long Island. Eventually works his way up to becoming second deputy chief there and a chief instructor. And then by 2001, he becomes second assistant chief at the Roslyn Rescue Fire Department. So, just nothing but a life of service. That is literally what this man ate, slept, breathed, loved and did his whole life.
Yeah, and as you were going through the timeline, and I was looking it over between his involvement in Roslyn and obviously his involvement with the NYPD, and I'll ask you an NYPD question in a moment. There are people that they'll take both tests, but they have a preference. I'll take both tests, but I
Sure.
really want to do fire, or I'll take both tests, but I really want to do the police side of things. I think as you go through his timeline, he honestly would have been happy and perfectly content in either one. It just happened that the police, as you said, called him first. Because I think if the FDNY called him, and this is, I know how it is with ESU and FDNY, I say this lovingly as someone who loves both. I think he would have been just as content being a New York City firefighter as he was a New York City police officer.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, in all functionality, he has lived more experience as a firefighter. I mean, by the time he got to NYPD, he had 4 years with firefighting through Roslyn Rescue. By the mid 90s, we're talking now like 15 years in. So I think he would have genuinely be happy wherever. Uncle Peter ended up kind of doing that swapperoo where he took us the both exams. My Uncle Peter actually ended up being a police officer first for a short while.
I didn't know that.
Yes, so my uncle Peter, my father's older brother, who ended up in FDNY Squad 252 in Brooklyn, he did send possibly around a year in the NYPD, and I'm not quite sure of the circumstances of the switcheroo, but so he ended up switching his roles on the way, and then he became one of the elder statesmen of the firehouse in 252, and he was the chauffeur. And of course, they both worked frequently at Roslyn Rescue. My Uncle Peter, I believe, had made it up to lieutenant a couple of times. And as brothers do, they had sometimes some disagreements. I do remember one point of contention was Uncle Peter's mustache, which if you've ever seen a photo of my Uncle Peter's mustache, it is a thing of glory. But I do recall my father, again, with his background as a firefighting instructor, was not too keen on it and was, kind of grilling him on, it's going to affect the seal of your SCBA mask and, it should be of this kind of stuff. And Uncle Peter, being a very blunt and to the point individual, is like, well, the FDNY is fine with it. So there's no need to change it.
And I love the photo of the two of them, and it's on the internet of them in front of an FDNY rig. Your father's in his ESU uniform, and your uncle's in his FDNY uniform. I associate your father so much with Queens. He was a 103 cop, and obviously Truck 10 being in Queens, that I had no idea. This is why I'm so glad I have the timeline that he was a Bronx cop for a period of time.
Yeah, so he was a Bronx cop in the 4-5, and if I recall my history correctly, I believe NSU 15 was Brooklyn, because during one of the many periods of memorials that we went through post 9/11, there is a specific wall. I don't recall the location in Brooklyn, but there is a memorial wall in Brooklyn of any first responder who had served or did serve or was serving, many verbs there, in Brooklyn, and Dad's on the wall for NSU 15. Yeah, I think my dad probably really enjoyed his time in the 4-5. He is definitely a worker and loved to be busy. So, I think he found his niche. He found something to do. In the blotter that I was reading where I learned about that, his big kind of project was dealing with a lot of the stolen cars that were in the area, or the auto theft rings where they would, come to vacant lots and similar things of that nature, dismantle them and things like that. So, he kind of always was on the beat, knew where to look, was looking for, ways to prevent, ways to respond, ways to mitigate these kinds of things. And I think he was ultimately motivated, especially in police work. Well, first, his desire was always to help. That's the overarching kind of theme of his life and his service. But I think for him, he would be really motivated. He was motivated by a sense of fairness, and I think he wanted to make life better for people who, worked in an area that was socioeconomically not so well off, and, wanted to make it better for the people who were working hard and trying hard, living their lives, doing their best. And he wanted to protect them, from those unfortunate things that happen.
Oh, of course, and I love Plini's comment again. They also worked together in the Bronx for a period of time because Billy was a longtime Bronx cop before he went to the bomb squad. He used to try and poach in the 4-3 surrounding precinct, and picture him now in the black Grand Fury with his anti-crime army jacket.
Yeah, I am not at all surprised by that comment. Over my time, after Daddy's passing, I got close with a lot of the gentlemen in ESU, especially Steph, who we know is in the comments. Shout out to Steph, my brother. And again, Sergeant Hargrove, rest his soul, an incredible man and a true gentleman. Sarge Hargrove used to tell me that my dad was very fond of monitoring 3 frequencies on radio when he was in the truck with him. He had the SOD, he'd have the 109 and surrounding precincts for the precinct frequencies I just said. And then he also liked to listen to the FD radio. He was very keen on trying to get out the door first. And again, that friendly rivalry that they have, he was, very hyped up on getting to the scene first if he could. There were many times Sarge told me that, he'd be in the truck with my dad, and my dad would just put his foot down on the gas and start, peeling off in the REP. And Sarge would just be like, "Where are we going, Tommy?"
Yeah, he was somebody, and again, that's something I remember talking to Paulie Perricone, who knew your father quite well from his time when Paulie was in one truck. And we weren't talking about your father specifically, but just the general ESU mentality, in that either way in New York City, and you know this from your uncle's experiences and from your father's experiences, you're pretty well served. Now, listen, you don't want to find yourself in these situations where you've been in a wreck or you've been in you're trapped in the water, whatever it may be. But you have these 2 elite departments, specifically 2 elite units racing to get to you. And as I've told plenty of people before, listen, I don't care if the person showing up has FDNY on the side of their uniform patch or the police emergency squad logo. I just want you to get me out. And many a time your father was that guy getting people out. And I don't think they cared just as long as they did.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's kind of funny that you mentioned to that point, because there was actually a very bad car wreck in Roslyn, or in a neighboring area that they served, in 2000 on Thanksgiving, which, as a sidebar, my father loved to work the major holidays, not just for the overtime, which was obviously a big bonus and helped us as a family out a lot. But he also loved to work the holidays, mostly because that's when all the big jobs were, was what he liked to say. He would be in on Thanksgiving, on Christmas, on New Year's, 4th of July, anything where, calamity was bound to show up is where Dad wanted to be. So to that end, one of the rare times he was home on Thanksgiving, there was a big car crash in Roslyn, and both my uncle and my father had showed up to that job. And, being extrication specialists, that was a very lucky individual that they managed to free from the wreck. So, absolutely, it's something that I have a lot of pride in, that my family is involved in such service, and that such wonderful humans, do serve the people of New York. And, obviously very unappreciated at times, unsung is kind of one of those, you don't appreciate them till you need them.
Exactly.
But, the passion about the job for both my uncle and my dad wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was always about doing the job, helping the person, making a difference. I think that's what really mattered to them.
I want to go through the photos momentarily, but one thing I wanted to ask you about, and you can expand on it, is EMS is such a focal point of all first response now, not just in ambulance corps. You see how many fire departments are heavily involved in it, and that started in the 90s. And even police officers now, too, especially those in emergency service. At the very minimum, you should be an EMT. If you're a paramedic, even better.
Right.
And your father started the Roslyn EMS program in the 90s, when that forefront was starting to affect the fire service in a positive way. So again, tell me about that, because that's such a big focal point of rescue.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I would imagine what inspired him was his time at Jamaica Hospital working in their EMS program. And, the city in the 80s was a very different beast than it is now. And, EMS definitely got put through its paces into some especially traumatic incidents that occurred. And I think one of the things about my dad, aside from being a person who always thirsted for knowledge and always wanted to learn and always wanted to be the best trained, I think another capacity that he had that made him an effective responder and an effective leader was he had an ability to identify needs or even be ahead of a curve when it came to, problems that might arise in the future and how would we address them, because as it is with emergencies, the time to solve or plan or prepare is before it happens, not after.
Right.
So I think he recognized at that time that there was a void in the department in that regard. Long Island is very interesting in particular in that there's multiple EMS agencies. You have your volunteer firefighter rescue related corps. So, Roslyn Rescue has EMS, Mineola has EMS, Williston Park has EMS. the Nassau County Police Department also runs an EMS group. There's Hetzola has an EMS group. The local hospitals have EMS. So, I mean, folks of Long Island are well covered. I think at that time, though, my father realized that, at least for Roslyn and the surrounding areas, they covered that particular need of service was lacking. And, he wanted to do something about it. And one person who was really involved with that was a woman by the name of Jane Stein. She did a lot to donate and give beneficiary kind of monies and donations to the department to allow them to help start up that EMS program, help with the ambulances. Many moons later, Roslyn Rescue ended up purchasing basically a sister vehicle to the NYPD's REP, because my dad would talk about them so much when he was there. At work we have this, at work we have that, we do this at work, we should do this. He was always trying to bring things from the experience of the NYPD to bolster and further the rescue mission of Roslyn Rescue Fire Department. So Jane Stein ended up donating the funds to get that memorial REP, which serves in Roslyn right now, and does have the requirement of having 2 fully trained EMTs on board. You cannot ride it if you're not fully trained in EMS. So I circle back to the point of he saw the need, he felt that it was an area that was lacking, and he just kind of took the reins and spearheaded getting EMS as a service that Roslyn could provide.
Mm-hmm. No, and thank you for expanding on that, because you don't think of it too much in bigger cities, but as you said, in smaller communities, in multiple different towns divided into one county, that's where it becomes critical, because especially in areas where it may not be as accessible, it may not be as easy to summon an ambulance, to have a department that at least on a basic life support level can respond to you and help you before maybe a paramedic can arrive and an ambulance can arrive is critical. So when I saw that on the timeline, I'm like, I've always had a keen interest in EMS. I'm going to get my EMT this summer. So that's something I'm like, let me ask about that. And I'm glad I did, because it was very insightful. You mentioned the FEMA team earlier. We're talking with Caitlin Langone. This is a tribute to her father, Tom, for volume 46 of the E-Men Inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. One of the things I can touch on with FEMA is that what makes Task Force 1 for New York so unique, and I'm not sure how it is now, but at least back then, it was the only task force to have law enforcement members on it because of the unique capabilities and capacities of the NYPD Emergency Service Unit. So you'd mentioned you spoke to Mike Core, and he's an absolute gentleman. He's been on this show, as you know. And that was really a revolutionary thing, because you combined the expertise of the FDNY, and Ray Downey was instrumental in that, with the NYPD's expertise. And there was, and I'll trace it back to New York in a moment with 1993, but just outside of New York, the first big test, or at least one of the first big tests, was ironically terrorism in the form of the Oklahoma City bombing. And so many ESU guys went down there, including your father. And we have one of the photos here. So as I display that photo, just tell me about what you know from his time down in OKC.
So I was about 6 years old when Oklahoma City bombing happened. So, spared me the majority of the details, but I did understand that something very tragic and bad had happened in Oklahoma City, and that Dad was going to help. So, I remember him getting boxes packed up full of his FEMA gear to be brought to the airfield to go on the C-130 out to Oklahoma City. And by the time my dad had gotten there with the rest of Task Force 1, it was more of a recovery than an actual rescue effort, which I think, was disheartening for him. Anybody who's a first responder, you want to make the difference when you can and save lives. But the work that you do in recovery is still instrumental in helping families find closure and just, bringing a sense of peace and completion to a job. So in this photo, I know I've met one of the gentlemen who are the canine handlers, who right now, of course, because we're live and I need to remember it escapes me.
It's all right.
But I remember a lot about these dogs specifically. So as a little sidebar, as I was growing up and post 9/11 and becoming into my teens and my 20s, and you're trying to figure out what in life you're going to do and the path you're going to take, I realized pretty early on that despite my love of all things emergency service, medicine, first response, I do not quite have the personality cut out to be a first responder, which is not necessarily, a bad thing. Sometimes the best thing you can do is recognize where you're not needed or where you would be a hindrance. Thank you, Mike Core. It's Bobby Schnell. Yes, I have met Bobby Schnell. I got to do a very brief workshop with him at the 9/11 Tribute Center run by Lee ILP, kind of just talking about those dogs' roles in search and rescue. kind of back to the original point. So when Dad came back, if you are also a Lingo and you are a dog lover, we have always had dogs. Uncle Peter, my grandma Sheila. When Dad had passed away, we actually had TJ, who was brother to Sergeant Hargroves Guinness. We both had dogs from the same breeder. So I bring this up to make a long story short. He told me a lot about these dogs, the amazing capacities that they had, the abilities that they had to find humans, to find people trapped, the work that the dogs did tirelessly, them going over rubble in their bare paws, that they had a vet team for them. So I'd always loved dogs as a kid, but that kind of really honed in for me as I got older, and I wanted to find a way where I could kind of still continue that Langone spirit of service, but not trying to be my dad. We're both individual people. We have our strengths and weaknesses. So that ended up inspiring me to pursue a career with dogs. Not so, life-changing or earth-shattering for anybody, but, I'm a dog trainer with a master's degree in dogs, and I help people train their dogs, have a better relationship with their dogs, work with them. So, anytime I am training, teaching, or working with them, it's really nice because it makes me feel very close to him, because we both love to teach, we love to explain, to share knowledge, to work with dogs. So just that photo, that experience in 95 was one of it. And then so not too long after that, about a week or so, I think they were deployed and they came back, and my dad being my dad didn't have too much to say about it, as he was like, the job is over, the work was done, this is what it was. Not long after that, anybody who responded got a certificate of appreciation from the city of New York by then Mayor Giuliani, which I do remember going to Gracie Mansion for that. We were really little, Brian and I. And then I beg a leave a year later, my mom and my dad flew out to Oklahoma for the first memorial of it. So just kind of a big old paragraph on a short photo.
No, it's all right. It paints a great picture. That's why I said, and I believe we have that photo right here. Hang on, let me click it again. It's not coming up on my end. I don't know if you could see it on your end.
Yep, we got it.
There we go. There it is. Yeah, there's Tom Langone with Mayor Giuliani at the time. And listen, again, it gets overshadowed by other emergencies that would follow in later years. But this was something that, shocked the world and shocked the U.S. because it wasn't just that it was terrorism, but it was homegrown extremism in the form of Tim McVeigh at the time. But if there was any positives that came out of that, and there's not many in a situation like that, it's the experiences the guys were able to have down there, where the citizens were just so grateful. And I remember Pete Conlon, who was down there as well, painting the picture when he was on, which is, it's like, these were the nicest people in the world. They just had this very tragic thing happen to them, and they couldn't have been any more nicer. They couldn't have been any more kind to us. And we're coming down to uplift them, but they ended up uplifting us. So if any silver lining is to be found, at least in a tragedy like that, it would be, that.
Yeah, I think, you can see in the background of the photo that you pulled up, there's so many thank you cards and things like that. And, just growing up, as a working class family, I'm sure my father prior to this didn't have too many chances to travel far afield if it wasn't in driving distance. I think that was his first time in the heartland of America. And I do remember him, saying, like, if we mentioned that, we were running low on, knee pads or something like that, then they'd get like, truckloads of knee pad. Like, people were just tripping over themselves to donate things. And it was a really, I think, inspiring and uplifting, like you said, experience for them to realize, such an outpouring of gratefulness and appreciation from those folk.
Absolutely. This next photo from his time in FEMA now, it's near and dear to my heart because I'm half Puerto Rican, half Dominican. And FEMA was huge down in the Dominican Republic after Hurricane George in 1998. There's been a myriad of storms where FEMA has assisted Puerto Rico as well. And this is a rather funny one. When was this? Give us the context.
So this, I believe, was probably maybe 97, 98, 99, somewhere in those very late 90s. Puerto Rico being functionally a Commonwealth, a territory of the United States at this point. I think after Hurricane George's, there was definitely the recognition that, Puerto Rico, we would always be happy to assist, the FEMA teams, but there was obviously a definite need for Puerto Rico to have its own FEMA team on the ground, since they would, already be there, as it were, and that it would benefit the people of Puerto Rico the most if their first responders were trained additionally in disaster response, search, rescue, extrication, recovery, in general emergency management. So the Office of Emergency Management from the city of New York sent several individuals, my dad being one of them, down to Puerto Rico to train said first responders on all of those areas that FEMA does work on. So they did a lot of training exercises, the debris field, working on shoring up rubble, how to identify potential hazards, entering, confined spaces, how to effect a rescue in a confined space, rope work, rigging, use of power tools, even what you might think is a simple thing is I have a video of my dad teaching these gentlemen and other first responders and giving a question like, how would you be able to quickly assess and size up the victim load in an area? How would you look at a building and get a rough idea of how many people are inside? One of the answers being you could look at the amount of cars in a parking lot and assume 1 car per person, give or take. Things like considering the time of week, time of day, and location. So, if a hurricane strikes a high school on a Saturday, less of an issue. It's not likely to be populated versus if you have a large natural disaster in the middle of a school day and it's high school. How many people can we expect to recover? What kind of injuries are we going to be looking at potentially? Just kind of everything that he had learned from, Oklahoma City, from all the training that FEMA did that they had experienced during the original Hurricane Georges. And the guys down there, they were very sweet on some of the online, memorial pages that the internet has up for my dad. A couple of those gentlemen down in Puerto Rico have left some lovely thoughts, which was really nice. And then, I think he had a really good time with them down there. His other passion in life was teaching. So putting together 2 of his favorite things, which was rescue work and teaching, I don't think he could have found a happier Tommy.
No, of course, that was the happy medium for him too. And I remember something Brian Hughes said, not to me, but just he commented this on an online memorial page, former lieutenant in emergency service, primarily, I believe, in Truck 5 in Staten Island, where he said, I don't think I've met anyone who knew more about rescue than Tom Langone. And that's one of the things that I'm like, when I look at his entry into emergency service in 1991, and I'm not just saying this because you're sitting here, I mean it, I would say it if we weren't talking. There was somebody that I don't think could have had an easier transition. He hit the ground running. He knew already. He had a head start. He knew so much about it.
Yeah, I think he did that quite probably on purpose. I mean, when he joined the Roswell Rescue in the 80s, that was, I think, probably his goal at that time,
Yeah.
with aspirations, of course, to get called to service to either FD or NYPD. But I think once he joined NYPD in 84, I think as soon as probably the first time he got to see or experience ESU, or he may have even heard about it from, Long Island has a very heavily centered population of, NYPD folk, people from FDNY. It's just
Right.
something, we're very close to the city. So if he hadn't met somebody prior while working with Roswell Rescue who told him about ESU, I think the first time he probably got to a job that ESU was on, that was it. That's what I want to do. And once knowing my father being very detail oriented, probably went to command. What are the requirements? What do I have to do? What do I need to know? How do I get there? And as soon as they told him, he took, like you said, hit the ground running. I'm going to join Jamaica EMS so I get more EMT experience. I'm going to keep working at the fire department, make sure I have experience with extrications, first tools, gating entry, locks, whatever it may be. I'm already a worker, but I'm going to make sure I keep working really hard. I have my excellent service record, that I'm on top of it and hitting all the points that I need to make so I can get in there. Because, if he set his mind to something, that is what we were doing. And he took learning very seriously. When I was little and my brother was little, education was a huge, huge thing for him. He would often tell us, I want you to work hard with your mind so you don't have to work hard with your back. Being a dog trainer, I unfortunately do work hard with my back, but my brother, for example, Brian really took that to heart. Brian, my brother has a dual bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering. He interned with Boeing and Ford. He actually worked at SpaceX for a brief period. So I do like to joke he was technically a rocket scientist, which he tends to wave off. But, it's his own company. So to that end as well, anytime that Roswell Rescue went somewhere for training, if they went to a seminar that was off field, say it was to become a rappel master or to work on some kind of, additional firefighter training, a gentleman in the fire department, John Sendak, who was very close to my dad mentored him, would tell me that, if, they're in the hotels on the drive up there, my dad would be like, look, get it straight. There's no sleeping in. All right. Like, we're here to learn. This is not a vacation. And then good on his word at 7 a.m. is on the door, like, let's go. We have somewhere to be. We're here to, we're here to learn. So it was not a vacation.
No, that's a good approach to have, because if you really want the job, whatever job it may be, you're gonna want to train on it. And it's strenuous work. It's strenuous not only from the physical standpoint, it's strenuous
Sure.
from the mental standpoint. Because as you said, and I love the way you painted the picture, if you're not thinking about these emergencies now, as as some people often fall into the pattern, I should say, of doing, too late. If you're not thinking about them now and being proactive as he was, when the time comes, you're not going to be prepared to handle them. And so he
No.
was someone who was prepared to handle them on all fronts. And he constantly educated himself as a fire instructor and obviously as a police officer. So I have one more FEMA photo, then we'll get into the ESU side
Sure.
of things. And that's, of course, him. I think this is before deployment.
Yes, this is when they're on the airfield, about ready. The C-130s in the background, and they're getting ready to go. This happens to be my mother's favorite photo of my dad.
Great photo.
I like, yeah, I know it's a great one. I happen to like the ESU photo that we'll probably see a little later. That's my favorite. But this is my mom's favorite photo of him. Yeah, so in the FEMA gear, we got our radio, we got our work gloves, and again, Tommy Langone was very known. He would smile, of course. He was human. He had emotions, but most of the time, most of the photos you're going to see is a very like serious business face expression. Like, again, we're here to do work. This is not a party. But yeah, just always ready, always ready to go. It's very much the ESU motto, right? Anytime, baby.
Exactly. I will say this, and again, he didn't have a hard time transitioning into it. He did just fine in emergency service, but he gets there in 91, like we said. He goes to Truck 10 in Queens. STS, he must have breezed by easily, especially with the prior knowledge that he had. But what makes ESU interesting is guys have told me, coming in, you got your guys that are well-rounded, and they know how to do both just fine. You got your guys who are more inclined towards the tactical side of things, and your guys who are more inclined towards the rescue. Now, listen, he had plenty of experience working in the Bronx and in the 103 to get used to the tactical side of things. But he comes in now, and he has to do it on a greater degree, because you can go from an overturn where you're extricating someone from the vehicle to where homicide detectives are calling you saying, we got our murder suspect in that apartment. We know he's got 2 guns on him, and he's going to potentially come out shooting. And this could all be in the same tour. So that's kind of the unique dynamic of an ESU, especially in New York City. So from what the guys have told you, tell me about Tommy Langone. Not only we know how he was as the rescue cop, but the tactical cop.
So one thing that immediately comes to mind in this is we had in my foyer of my house, we had a 5-gallon bucket full of locks and doorknobs. Partly, I think, because of this kind of tactical experience. I mean, like deadbolts, like any lock you could possibly run across, with possibly the exception of like the 4-bar Fox lock that goes across the whole door, we had in that bucket, which drove my mother bananas. She really hated it because she was like, it's a mess. And he would fiddle with them and like work on picking them and getting used to like, how do I get them apart? Or like, how would I get into this? How would I circumvent these kinds of situations if we're running into, say, somebody who's a barricaded perp, but has also gone through the process of fortifying their apartment to be like Fort Knox. How do we overcome this? Yes, we have somewhat, to an extent, we have time on our side, but how do we circumvent this? How do we do this as efficiently as possible? So we had a bucket of locks that he would practice on. Camp Smith was I think he really looked forward to going to Camp Smith. I know the rappel side of the thing he always enjoyed, but I think he really enjoyed, doing the somewhat the minutia of those drills of, the search and sweeps, the checking, the whole process, the order of events of how we are getting in, who's holding the bunker, who's the gunman, who's the cuff man, who are doing these things. And I think it's just something where it allowed his laser focus to kind of just shift into that tactical mode. I want to say it was actually early 2001 or so. Dad applied to join the sniper team for ESU and was accepted. I actually I do actually have his sniper logbook here at my house because my dad was a bit of a pack rat with the ultimate goal of, when he retired, he wanted to teach. So he kept a lot of these things to share with future generations and impart that knowledge. So I have the sniper logbook. From what I can see from the shots, he was definitely a good shot. I distinctly remember him bringing the sniper rifle home one day, and anybody who's seen one knows they're not small. It's about the width of a queen size bed end to end. And he had he was very safe, obviously, with weapons. He took that extremely seriously, making sure it was fully safe we looked at it. We were not allowed to touch it. We were also not allowed to touch it because, as he said, it took me forever to get the scope just right. So we were also not allowed to touch it from that capacity. So, even though there was definitely that rescue component of him, he was also extremely serious about that tactical end and was, I think one of the last entries in the sniper logbook was like September 8th or September 7th of 2001. So, the tactical side of things were something where, he's a very intelligent man. So I think it provided him a different challenge and a challenge that he enjoyed learning about and wanted to excel at. He did write some articles for some various publications. One of them was Fire Engineering, but one of them was also The Tactical Edge. And it was a series. So 2 articles about, getting into locked or barricaded perpetrator apartments, how to size it up. Something even as simple as try the door first, see if it's unlocked is in there. So, kind of, again, trying to further that knowledge in whatever capacity he could. I don't, given the fact that we were younger when my dad was in ESU, Brian, I was 12 by September 11th, my brother was 10. Not all of the tactical stories made their way to us. But it was definitely something I think he approached with as much intensity, passion, and desire to learn, in that stead. Yes, yes, I don't think my husband's wrong there. And actually, thank you, Steph, for mentioning. So when Dad went to Camp Smith one time, he met a bunch of guys from the Ottawa tactical team, one of them by the name of Jamie Jordan, who he stayed good friends with for many, many years, and we're still in contact with Jamie.
Nice.
So, I think it was something he was interested in, something he didn't share about as much with us. Dad also knew we really liked the excitement of the rescue stories, whereas, anybody in some kind of tactical unit or SWAT will tell you it also stands for sit, wait, and talk. So he recognized that it wasn't always the most exciting thing to talk about, but, something I'm sure he thoroughly enjoyed in one of his many, many scrapbooks that we have. I believe he's got an Ernest Hemingway quote that the most dangerous game to hunt is man. So
not wrong.
Right. So, I think it was definitely, I think he enjoyed everything about the job.
Yeah, he was an all-rounder.
Absolutely.
I think that's very fair to say. And I remember a conversation I had with Tina Guerrero, who had the opportunity to work with your dad because she got there in 1998 to emergency service, where just talking about the sniper rifle, talk about precision. I mean, that's a decision that listen, it's a very hard decision to have to make. It's necessary to have it in place. But to give you an idea, we can put an apple 6 houses down from where I am right now conducting this interview with Caitlin Langone. And somebody like your father, Kate, would probably be able to hit that apple dead center from this distance. That's how good you have to be on a sniper team. So talk about dedication. And again, stuff I thought I knew a lot about your dad, and I'm learning more as we go tonight. I never knew that about him. So that's why I'm extra glad you're here.
I mean, I think, that gives an interest. Like you said, it's a call that one hopes they never have to make. But obviously, when you sign up and are accepted onto that team, you understand that. I mean, even as a general police officer, there's always the unfortunate possibility that you may have to take a life to save a life. But I think when you sign up for that, you understand. It's almost like old time warfare, where I'm talking, bayonets, swords, and that kind of stuff, where you are making eye contact, or you have a connection, a visual connection with the person that you have to take out. And I think he was fully prepared to do that if he needed to. It would have been very interesting to see how he would have progressed in it. But from what I can see in the logbook, the grouping was very tight. I think he was doing well.
No, he was doing quite well. And like I said, I'm like, once again, well put, that this is not a video game. This is not Grand Theft Auto, where after you commit the homicide in the video game, it's just a video game. You move on with your life. Even if it's justified, it weighs on the conscience of an officer. And there's a story today in Philadelphia where an officer had to do that in the case of a dog that was mauling someone. He did the right thing. He saved the person's life from a certain death by way of the dog, but it's still something that weighs heavily on the conscience. And, getting back to your father's career, this was a photo you and I were talking about off there, and it's got 2 great people in it who aren't with us anymore. And this photo, you see the contrast. Your dad's all business. And then you got Sergeant John Cochran, another gem of a person, by all accounts, with the biggest smile.
Yeah, judging by my father's expression, he's either annoyed about something or confused about something, and that confusion is then leading to annoyance. So unfortunately, I don't know the full circumstances of this particular tactical job, but just it's such a contrast in extremes, right? And I'm sure my father was thrilled to be there too. So I just find that really funny. I do recall my dad actually one time let us know that he had earned the nickname of Rommel at work, a la the German command's the Western, the Desert Fox from the Africa
Right.
Corps campaign in World War II, which we were like, how the hell did you get that one? And he told us that Mike McKenna had gave him that moniker because he was wearing said tactical helmet with the goggles up top, and I guess bore a striking resemblance to the German commander. So that was always something that stuck out with me when I looked at the tactical photos. Is just and for all historical implications aside from being part of the German army, Rommel was a tactician bar none. So interesting, interesting comparison there.
No, and again, I think Stephanakis is saying that that's Richie Winwood's back. I thought it was Bobby Gregory, but it's Richie Winwood, and he's saying that that job was in the Bronx. So I
Oh,
guess
maybe he's
Tom,
giving a look at Winwood.
yeah, and I know guys would fly, so maybe Tom and Richie were flying on over to Fort Truck that day because that's where John was a sergeant. And this is another photo I love as well. Again, talking about the medical side of things and rescue side of things. Here's your father aiding a victim. I think, if I remember correctly, did you tell me this was a shooting victim?
It judging by how serious my dad looks, and the buildings in the background, it's very likely that that is the case. And Dad is doing what one of my friends later termed the business walk, which is the like absolutely no nonsense, like we need to move and we need to move now
Yeah.
pace. And as you can see, he is not a short man, so that is a ground eating stride there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely it looks to be certainly a serious situation, judging by the expression on his face. And I mean, that is how he met all aided cases, even in the fire department when he was chief, or when he was the training officer in between his time as chief. My dad took patient safety and patient care extremely seriously, as one should. I remember there was a job where I believe the Nassau County Police Department EMS assisted on a job, and my father wasn't particularly happy with how some of the care was conducted. Just he felt things were missed. But instead of, he approached it in a very diplomatic manner. It wasn't, he pulled the gentleman aside who he had issue with, and just kind of explained, from his experience, what was done incorrectly, why it was incorrect, what should have been done, and how to improve that in the future. Which, I would say, like, he was generally always very fair, and pretty diplomatic. I'm sure he definitely had his moments where he got excited and a little, as we kids say, extra about it. I'm sure some people would call him uptight about it, but yeah, I mean, like, that's one of my favorite photos of my dad too, just because the level of, like, seriousness, and again, that kind of looking ahead. It's both the literal fact that he's looking to where he's going, but there's almost a symbolic fact of I have to look ahead and I'm planning, where am I going next with this guy? What kind of care is he going to need when we get in the back of the bus? How much time have we been on scene? How much more time do we have on scene? Where are we going? What hospital are we going to? You can almost see that register kind of coming so naturally to him. And I mean, something that's kind of interesting in the career of rescue work is, we touched on some of the other, as we like to call it, or the general people at ESU call it, the big jobs.
Yep.
About a year into my father's career of being chief with Roslyn Rescue, he responded to the crash of Avianca Flight 52.
I didn't know that either. Wow.
Yeah, so that was a picture that's in Roslyn Rescue Firehouse, which my brother and I spent probably as much time at the firehouse as we did in our own home. That it always fascinated me, just the picture of that big orange Avianca plane just amid all the dark trees and woods. It was in East Marches on Long Island, so it's on the very rocky shore of Long Island. It's all hills and things like that. And I mean, that's like 10 years into his tenure of being a firefighter, and he and Uncle Peter went into that situation. And I mean, most volunteer firefighting companies, excepting, say, if you are in, well, California has all professional paid. My brother lives out there. But that being said, unless you're in the immediate vicinity of an airport, you can expect reasonably as a volunteer firefighter that a plane crash is probably never going to show up on your list of big jobs. And 1990 rolls around, and Avianca 52 basically falls out of the sky into the hills of East Norwich, and my dad and my Uncle Peter were there, which I'm sure helped a lot and informed him a lot for other big jobs. So 93's bombing, which I know we'll cover, Oklahoma City, the level of destruction that they saw there. And, he was involved in the recovery when TWA Flight 800 went down off the coast of
Need to
Long
ask you about
Island
that
as
too a little
well.
bit later on as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, as a kid, that was a photo that always fascinated me, just the contrast of that bright orange plane up against all the trees and the darkness of it, because it happened really late at night. And you're also talking an area that has like 2-lane roads, in and out. It's very windy, it's very hilly, and just the challenges that I think a situation like that presents in such a mass casualty incident. Probably really served to, again, make him even more experienced, better informed, and help guide those kinds of questions and answers he wanted to provide of how do we assess, how do we prioritize, how do we, tag in a mass casualty incident like this? Where's the best way to send resources? Where do we stage? What can we get? What can't we get? All those kinds of things. I think it was a tremendous learning experience for sure.
Yeah, and the thing that I like to say, and I harken back to conversations I have where I work at my firehouse, currently on the civilian side, and other conversations I've had through this podcast over the years, which is know where you work and look at where you're working. It's a city of 8 million people. If you're not thinking about what could happen, either from a terroristic standpoint, from a plane crash standpoint, you have two major airports in the city, in Kennedy and LaGuardia, and even Newark flights coming over. If you're not thinking about it, then you're just not paying attention, and you're just sitting there, as you said, the SWAT acronym, even though we're joking around, it's not what SWAT actually does, sitting, waiting, and talking until the big one hits, and you're like, oh no, now what do I do? That wasn't your father. So when you have guys, you need guys like that game plan ahead, because when they do, hey, listen, good things happen as a result. And even though you don't want these emergencies to happen, when they do, at least you're prepared.
Yes, the key is to be able to affect the most efficient and effective rescue you possibly can, where you are maximizing that golden hour, you are maximizing your resources, you are maximizing your abilities. I guess East Moriches was TWA, Oyster Bay was Avianca. Thank you, husband. So you want to be able to maximize every potential of every resource that you have, knowing which, individuals under your command are, better suited at scene control, who's better at extrication, who's the best, who's top of the line when it comes to medical service and providing care to patients. It's all important to know those things and have a really good sense of them, to have a good command of it from the get-go. And then, your job as, being an officer, if you are chief, having then not only to keep track of all those moving pieces, but to make sure that you as a leader are the most effective that you can be and are utilizing those resources effectively, is incredibly important.
Absolutely. We're talking with Caitlin Langone, special edition of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. This is a tribute to her father, Tom, for Volume 46. And a quick shout out, by the way, to Kathy Vigiano, who is the widow of Joe Vigiano, another great man, lost on that terrible day, and another legend of the NYPD Emergency Service Unit. That guy was, talk about Iron Man. I'd love to do a show on him in the future, and hopefully we can. But getting to 1993, this is red. Bombings had happened before in New York City. The Wall Street one of 1920 was one of the earliest ones. Numerous domestic terror groups in the 70s and 80s unfortunately kept ESU and the bomb squad quite busy with the amount of bombings they were doing in New York. But this is 1993, where for the first time the adversary is not on home soil. It's coming from abroad. And I've gotten the picture from the bomb squad guys who were there, from Franco Baraducci and Daryl Summers and Sergeant Joe Sett from the old Transit Police Rescue Unit who were there. But this is an all hands on deck situation. If you were FDNY, if you were NYPD, Housing Police, Transit Police, you went. And ESU was certainly a part of that, climbing stairs for quite a while. So from what you can put together from your dad's involvement in that particular job, what was his role as far as rescues and anything else concerning the 1993 Trade Center bombing?
Sure. So like you had said, anybody ESU, if I know my father, I'm pretty sure he was working that day itself. I don't think he had to be called in. He was working, he came in and responded to effect rescues. So I'll mention his scrapbooks a lot. We have a scrapbook that he made that is specifically just World Trade Center from 1993. That's the entirety of that particular scrapbook. There's also an Oklahoma City scrapbook. But in the 93 scrapbook, there's photos of the massive emergency response on the West Side Highway Bridge. The entire street is fire rigs and ESU Riggs. So, they went into with his team to effect the rescue. Obviously, a very different circumstance. The roof rescue was possible at that time, I believe.
Mhm.
I'm trying to recall if he was involved in that specific aspect, which now escapes me. Hopefully, somebody in the comments has an idea. That's the one downside to being somewhat young for a lot of my dad's stories is some of those little pieces get missing. But either which way, the man was definitely there, definitely effected the rescue. He also did a lot of the work in terms of the evidence recovery. So in that WTC binder, I have there's a lot of photos of my dad in like functionally a hazmat suit in the basement in the garage, or around the rubble, helping look for evidence. I believe Don Sadawi from the bomb squad, the gentleman
Yep.
who found the axle with the VIN, the linchpin,
Great
as
guy.
it were. Yes, a wonderful man. I did my moth tribute interview with him. Um, Dad worked with him. And in part of that evidence recovery, so we have photos of that. And actually, one thing that I kind of treasure that's in that scrapbook is there's a handwritten SOS piece of paper that I think the folks were on like the 63rd or 73rd floor of one of the towers, that they must have opened the window and chucked this piece of paper out. And on it, it says, SOS, we are trapped, 63rd floor. And if you flip it over, it's actually like a fax sheet for a company on the back. And he just flipped, that they flipped over and just wrote on it because, these poor people have no idea what's going on or what to
Right.
do. Which it's very stark to me. It's very interesting, to have a relic like that from 93 and then what happens in 2001. But yeah, definitely was working that day and then got involved in the evidence recovery portion. And I think that is, again, another big job that really influenced the way he started to think again about big responses, big incidents, possibly inspired his desire to make a high angle rescue rappelling kit that he was fiddling with morning of September 11th. Again, one of those things that you respond, you effect your rescue, you do your job, and then afterwards you reflect, you learn what could we have done better, where were mistakes made, how do we help the people in the buildings, prepare for evacuations, what could we've done better, where can we learn from this? And yes, Uncle Peter was there too.
Yes, he
I
was.
don't know if they happen to cross paths, very busy, but naturally, both Langones on the scene.
Yeah. And that was one of those situations where, and most of you in the audience know this, but for those of you that may not, what happened with that truck bomb is you essentially had two towers and 110-story ones at that becoming two chimneys. And I'm not trying to be funny when I say this, it's not meant to be, but they were at that time two of the largest smoke chimneys in the world. So imagine being up on the 63rd, 64th floor, you're getting that smoke all the way down from the North Tower's garage. It created a situation where many couldn't get out, they couldn't see, and they were stuck up there for hours. And as you said, there was the helicopter rescues available then. For those of you that may not have seen my interview with Tim Farrell, go back and watch that. He recalls that in detail because he was a part of it. Mike Curtin was also involved in that. And that was something that, set the blueprint for future rescues and preparation in the city because, unfortunately, bad guys, no matter what type of bad guys, and this is something your father understood quite well, looking back at his career, whatever the kind of bad guy it is, a robber, a terrorist, whoever it may be, a gunman, they don't stop planning. They don't take a break.
No.
If they don't get it right the first time, they're going to come back again. And so if you can stay 2 steps, 10 steps ahead of them, that's something that's imperative, especially in police work. And Mike Core says ESU assisted FBI and ATF for 6 weeks in the garage basement of World Trade Center, or the World Trade Center, I should say. Over 400 cars had to be searched for bodies and to remove fragments of any bomb material. So as you said, he was involved in that too. And that's, people forget, that's another big part of emergency service work in the NYPD. Yes, you're responding in a tactical or rescue sense, depending on the job. And even though they're not detectives in terms of investigating these cases, they're detective specialists for the most part. Now, they do have a hand at these crime scenes, no matter how big or small, in preserving the evidence. And detectives in the Bureau are certainly appreciative of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you mentioned, obviously folks who seek to commit crimes or seek to create mass havoc, mass harm, never stop planning. It kind of reminded me of when my father was teaching the folk in Puerto Rico for their FEMA team. Obviously, natural disasters are not the only kind of disaster you're going to respond to. And so he had a large segment in which he was talking about, situations of mass bombings and terrorist attacks. And he had actually mentioned from a class that he had taken with several explosives folks who basically were super well versed in explosives and determining them, not with the NYPD, but I think with some possibly the FBI, ATF. And they also had folks come over from England or Northern Ireland, because obviously in the 90s, the Irish conflict is the troubles are a big issue at this point. And my father had mentioned, learning that and then passing on to the gentleman in Puerto Rico that, one thing that they might do is they'll start a fire somewhere and then go to the firehouse and hold all the firemen hostage so that they can't respond to the fire, being aware that, if it is a terrorist incident that you as a first responder may be a target, you have to be aware not just of the rescue capacity, but think tactically, who is surrounding me, what is going on, what is there a second shooter, to borrow a phrase, waiting in the wings to take you out as you go. And just the callous disregard for human life. He relayed his story how, many children unfortunately were lost in the troubles, and the IRA had planted bombs and actually teddy bears in a mall. And a little child came with their parent and bought said teddy bear. And my dad actually brought my brother and I up to make a point of, at that point, we still had stuffed animals that we would sleep with. And he said, my son and my daughter, every night they have to have it. And that child ended up succumbing to the bombing from that teddy bear that was planted, which, is devastating. And I think his point in bringing all that up to them is being aware that we were entering a changing world, and then just helping to cultivate that intense awareness that you have to have. When you are even in EMS, you have to be aware of scene safety and your potential to be a target. But when you're operating on the law enforcement side, if you are both rescuer, you also are still a law enforcement officer, and you may have to shift gears mid-rescue to, contend with a threat that might be coming, or at least be aware of the potential for a secondary incident, an additional incident, whatever it may be, that is trying to interrupt, thwart, or otherwise prevent you from carrying out your rescue operation.
Mm-hmm. No, and before I get back to your father's photos and a few contributions in the chat that I'll highlight, I would have loved, and I know you feel the same way, to have been a fly on the wall, not just, and really at any of the ESU trucks, but 10 truck, 96, 97, 98, for these types of discussions, because they were having them. And the amount of knowledge and the amount of helpful information and smart recommendations that were being said at that table by your father, by Steph Winwood, Paul Hargrove, whoever may have been there at the time, what I wouldn't give to, like I said, have been a fly on the wall for those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly, it's a cast of characters for one, but a bunch of very dedicated, intelligent individuals with varying personalities. But I think that's what lent them such a great strength as a squad, and why they were so tight. I mean, all ESU trucks are incredibly efficient, and each squad has its own personality and quirks and abilities. But I think with that particular squad of Truck 10, the real love was for rescue specifically. So, I'm sure the amount of just idea and brainstorming that happened there led to probably so many, advances in their repertoire personally, things that they were able to share with other trucks, things that my dad was probably able to bring back to Roslyn Rescue, the Fire Service Academy. And, I think that's the probably really incredible part about knowledge, is not only can nobody take it from you, but it's one of the greatest gifts that you can give. It never expires. It never goes away. It doesn't wither, and it has the potential to be carried on, for generations. So it's definitely to be a fly on the wall, and there would have been a real treat.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I say this somewhat facetiously. You don't know how much, I'm half joking when I say this, of course, but you don't know how much I wish your dad would have been involved, and I'm sure he wished he would have been involved too in that episode of Cops where 10 Truck gets the MVA and the pin job. Glenn Klein's on it.
Yes,
Tom
Glenn
Rose
Klein is
on
in it.
But I'm
Yes,
like,
Mr.
oh, man,
Klein.
I think Ray Denninger is also in it, and I'm like, when I was watching it for the first time, because I was looking for those episodes of Cops forever, and they posted 2 of them. There's 4 of them total, but 2 of them are on YouTube, and Lieutenant Sobocinski has a big role in both. But that last one in episode 1, like I said, 10 trucks on. It's on the highway. Your father must have went to a bajillion of those throughout his career, but I kept looking for him. Like, is he in it? Is he? And he wasn't. But I'm like, man.
It's funny in that, like, it does seem, for the most part, like those cameras always seem to miss him. which again, it wasn't necessarily something like he was looking for, but you definitely would
Right.
be
Yeah.
like, of course Tommy would be there. Like, where is he? I mean, I will tell, like, as you had mentioned in previous interviews with other 10 truck alumni, um, the gray hair definitely made it really easy to find him on video. If there was a big job, you just look for the really tall guy with gray hair, and you've pretty much found him. So anytime he was caught on video, or say had an interview with a newsreel or anything like that, he would call back to our house. And would tell my mother, like, there's a really big job in Queens. It's going to be on Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 7. Like, make sure you set up the VCR. Yes, nice that I'm talking to this generation of folk. I don't sound so old talking about a VCR. some of my colleagues at work are just like, you don't know what a VCR is, do you? You got to tape it. Make sure you tape it. This one's on at 6. This, if you have to do multiples, it's fine. He was both proud of it, but again, he also wanted to save it to eventually circle back to it and teach, whether it be that he'd bring it to STS when he was an adjunct instructor and, show the guys then and explain what happened, what went on, and why we did it that way. It was always to tape it. So we have like a whole trove of VHS tapes too, with videos on it. One of the probably most famous, I'll say in quotations, videos is this is the job that happened in 1993 in the Bronx, where the gentleman, the aided, is the ledge is probably that wide that he's got his feet on. Yes, it's the jacket video. There's a massive bust through there. They have guys in the windows underneath him. They've got guys roped in. I remember my dad is on the roof, and at one point he's going like this to the guy. He's like, "Come over and talk to me," and the guy says something back to him. He's like, "I can't get down now. I'm up here like you. Like, come talk to me." With that really thick New York accent, and that's when they see an opening. They go to grab him. He's wearing a jacket, so my dad dives, to go grab him, and the jacket comes off, and he's, you see him like look over there, it's like, what just happened? Obviously, they pulled him through the window, but that actually made it onto Real TV, if anybody remembers that show back in the day. So I think like that was one of the big ones that he was involved in. So yeah, that was taped. I cannot tell you how many times we've seen it and how many versions of it we have. Because it was like, well, it's going to be on Real TV. You have to tape that one, but it's going to be on Channel 2 at this time. You have to tape that one. So we have a lot of those.
I love it. And I'm really enjoying this. This is volume 46 of the Even inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. Our guest is Caitlin Langone. I promise I'll get to you guys in the chat momentarily. But there was one, it was in the Children of 9/11 documentary, and you would know which job this was. I know it's the late 90s because they're wearing the darker ESU uniforms at this point. And in his thick New York accent, where the reporter asked him, I think it was someone from Channel 2, was it a good job? He's like, oh yeah, we got the guy. It's a good day's work. Well, you know what job that was?
I think this was actually the same job as the gentleman with the jacket. People in the chat, world at large, forgive me if I'm wrong. Again, like I said, I'm young, so some of my memories are not quite. I think it just took them a long time. Like, that dude was up there for hours. And I think it's the same job, because later in the reel, they were, my dad, the reporter asks, like, hey, how was it talking to him? Or like, what did you do? And my dad was like, he was a smart guy. He's like, you're not going to calm me. You're not going to calm me. Like, he knew a lot of the talk and de-escalation tactics that they would use. So he was just like playing with them for a little bit there. But yeah, I think it's the same job. You're 100% right that, this is a good job. Oh yeah. Guys, it was a great job. Nobody got hurt. We got the guy. Yeah, it's a great job. He just that like super pleased smile that he always does. I got to do something exciting.
Which is my favorite part of the clip, because he is smiling, as you said. Chris Ebden wasn't in the NYPD. He was over in New York City /FDNY EMS, but he says, worked EMS in Queens, did jobs with him backing me up on truck 10 and me backing him up on the bus. I also did 2 or 3 fire classes with him instructing when I was on Elmont Heavy Rescue. Great man. And this is an interesting question from Stu Kelsall. He's from across the pond, where it's just after 1 in over there, so I appreciate him staying up late to watch this, as he always does. He says, question for Caitlin, did your father ever tell you what or who influenced his career the most?
Interestingly not, no, but I'm going to take a wild guess. It looks like also my Aunt Joanne's in the chat. Hi, Aunt Joanne. That would be my father's younger sister.
He left us here too.
Yes. I'm going to take my first guess would be, I think my grandpa Paul made a huge, huge impact on him. Gentlemen of that era and even into now a little bit are kind of stoic with their feelings. My dad would describe himself many times as not an open up and share things kind of a guy. But I think my grandpa Paul really inspired him. I think both him and Uncle Peter looked up to my grandpa a lot. Like they wanted to, I said, follow him as soon as they could into Rosalind Rescue. And I think that made a big impact on their legacy. I'm also going to hazard to guess any of the emergency shows that were running around on TV in this, in the 70s and the 80s, like Adam 12 or
Yep.
Emergency, probably definitely also made a big impact on him as well. Possibly MASH. Our house is a big household's a big MASH household.
Great show.
So yeah, it's a great show. So I think things like that, but I would probably pin it the most on, I think, Grandpa Paul. I think Grandpa Paul was probably his biggest inspiration in wanting to do that.
Well, he taught him well. And before I get back to Tom's career, of course, from the NYPD side of things, particularly in the emergency service unit, we'll highlight those photos. A big thing for him and our conversation, it comes through even more family. He was for as important as his life on the rescue side of things between fire and police were, equally important was family, being present as a father, being present as a husband, and he certainly was. And I love these that you shared a mixture of both his work photos, but also his family photos. And here he is, for as happy as he was in Tentruck and Rosalind, he looks just as happy here.
Yeah, dad, obviously I'm biased, which I think everybody would know just because you talk about my dad, but he really was an incredible dad. And that is, I believe, August of 2000. We went to Rhode Island. We did the cliff walk. So this is a nice family photo. As you can see, my father's hair is so gray, it actually blends into the sky. The white balance on the camera is probably a little off, but that just gives you an idea. Also, the eye doctor, his eyes were so blue. The eye doctor was like, Tommy, you have to wear sunglasses. Your eyes will burn. Your eye, like they're so light blue, like you can get sunburn on your eye.
Wouldn't be good.
That same particular cliff walk, there are multiple, like there's the main cliff walk, and then there's little adjacent cliff like rock protrusion structures, as you were. Gave my mother a heart attack because he wanted to get a photo of my brother and I, so he decided to jump from the main cliff walk onto said rock to get the photo, which my mother the whole time was like, Tommy, stop it. He did like to mess with her a tiny bit when we drove to New Hampshire and we went up Mount Washington. As you can imagine, being in the ESU, my father had little to no fear of heights whatsoever, which is not a trait I share. Another reason I can't follow him into the service. I do not like heights. So we're driving up. Yeah, right. I think it's a fairly reasonable photo. Yeah, humans are not meant to be off the ground. So we're driving up Mount Washington. Floyd, you're too funny. He goes, he willed all of his remaining hair color to his mustache. My brother is 30. Brian's 33, still is brown. So that might have just been a fluke. Maybe it was just the years of being amongst calamity and emergency just took all the color out. But New Hampshire, we're driving up Mount Washington. Like a bunch of times he's driving, he just kind of like starts to like gently lean the car toward the edge. He's like, oh, look how far down it is, Joanne. And she's just like this on the handle, just like, Tommy, stop it. Yeah, as a dad, he was obviously incredible, again, biased. But I personally think I had probably one of the most fun childhoods you can have. I mean, a lot of little kids love fire trucks and firemen, and we spent a lot of time at the firehouse. From what my mother was telling me, I spent some of my infancy in the firehouse. She got annoyed at him one day because he had to go to a call and he was watching me when I was like 6 months old or so. So he packed me up in my little car carrier and into the chief car I went, and away we went. But she got kind of upset because he neglected to take a baby bag with diapers and bottles and whatnot. So yeah, I have memories of being about 2 and being in the chief's car and, seeing, we're parked safely away, but I can see the glow of fire from buildings. A couple of times we got to ride on the ambulance. And Brian and I got really well trained to responding to calls. So when we were at home, this is the era of the beeper. So not only did he have the pager, the Motorola pager, which we memorized that sound, he had a beeper. And there were 2 different tones. One was just the regular page, and then the one was the emergency page, which I still distinctly remember the noise of. And if we heard that page, my brother and I would get our shoes on and then just go stand by the chief car because we knew we were going either to the firehouse or on the call. So we would just wait. So we just took as little time up as possible. we knew to be very quiet in the car when we were going to the calls because you'd have to be on the radio. I have very distinct memories of, his voice really steady going Firecom 5602, which is the call sign for his chief car at that point. And we celebrated our birthdays and communions at the firehouse. Birthdays at home had a lot of his firefighting friends would come. And then anytime we went on vacation, it's always about learning. I can't tell you, we never amusement parks as kids on vacations. Like that never happened, to which point I hate roller coasters now because I never went on them as a kid. We went to a lot of museums though. There's a photo of my brother, my dad, and I on top of a sub from like a decommissioned sub because we went to a naval museum, which my mom was bored to tears, but he took us there. We went to like the railroad museum. We went to, zoos to learn about animals. Like it's always learning in some capacity. We went to get fencing one time and I'm in 5th grade and we're learning about perimeter. He's like, how do I figure out how much fencing that I need for the yard? I'm like, math is not my strong suit. So it's just
you and I both, girl. Don't worry. Don't worry.
That's why I'm a dog trainer. I'm not good at math.
2 plus 2 equals 4. That's all I can get.
Mommy says Rhode Island was summer 2001. I misspoke. Sorry, Mom. So, asked us about perimeter, how do I make change for $1? Like, here's $1, here's 4 quarters. These are the same. And I was like, but they're not the same. One's a little round metal disc. The other's paper. No, I'm kidding. But, he would be like, why don't you get this? Constantly teaching us. We only had one TV in our house at the time because Daddy felt that TV time was family time, which also meant when Dad was home and we were watching TV, that Dad was running the clicker, which is what we called it. It's not the remote, it's the clicker. So we would watch like Wild Discovery documentaries about animals. We'd watch History Channel documentaries. We're watching Cops, of course. We watched Trauma Life in the ER. And then man's knowledge of history, especially when it came to like World War II or firearms, was insane. I can't tell you how many times we'd be watching Tales of the Gun, which I only ever saw the intro to because it was at 9:00, which was bedtime. The narrator would be going, this is the revolver that won the rest, made in 1864, and then before the guy can finish, my dad goes, it's the Colt 45. And then the guy goes, the story of the Colt 45. I'm just like,
how did you know this?
Like, how do you know all of this? Like, remember it so well. When there was a local duck pond, a little park in Roslyn that was near the firehouse, we would go to a lot, and he would teach us about any like animals we saw. It's where I learned that baby swans are called cygnets because we saw a bunch of baby swans. And just like, we spent a lot of time with him. I have a lot of memories from like spring and summer, when school starts to let out and he would watch us more. I mean, his hands were huge. He used to say, I have hands like frying pans. Because when I was little, I could only hold his ring finger and his pinky. His hands were too big for my whole hand. He would take us to get pizza at the same pizza shop he used to get lunch from when he was in high school. But he did little thoughtful things too. Like when we had the pizza, he knew the bottom was hot. In summer, we're wearing shorts. So he would take like a firefighting magazine or some of his work gloves and he'd put that on our lap and then put the pizza on us so we didn't burn ourselves. Which, seems like something you should do. But I just remember that as being really sweet and attentive. And he was really fair with my brother and I. Like, he didn't treat us any differently because he had a son or a daughter. If we were learning how to throw a football, we're both learning how to throw it. We're both learning how to catch it.
Nice.
That's where the hands were like frying pans comment came up because Brian and I, he told us to make like the basket and pull it in. And we go, but like, Dad, how come you're catching it like this? And the hands like frying pans. One time we got really freaked out by a thunderstorm that was really bad that came in. Dad was at the truck and Mom could not calm us. So she had to call him because if things became very emergent or made us very anxious or very nervous, it was like we needed Dad to tell us that everything was okay because then we felt safe
Right.
because we knew the man could handle literally anything. So his way of calming us down was explaining how a thunderstorm works. Like this is, there's a difference in charge and that's why the lightning comes down and the thunder is just the expansion of the air after the lightning goes off. But he knew enough to know that like by explaining it, it would make it less scary and it would make it make sense, which was really great. Or just I have a lot of memories of like teaching, a lot of moments of teaching. Another funny thing is probably some of the guys from the truck know this and wonder why he was insensitive. So my dad's siblings are all classic rock lovers. My dad loved country music, loved it, which is a passion I do not share. Probably because of my childhood. I'm talking like, Black Hawk, Brooks and Dunn, Garth Brooks, Toby Keith, like country. So somebody asked him once, like, tell me, like, what, why? when he was in his teens, just before graduating high school, there's a local camp in Roslyn, Pierce Camp, and one of his neighbors, a gentleman by the name of Clyde Seeley, was the mechanic and maintenance guy for Pierce Summer Camp. And my dad used to drive the school buses for the camp, which, looking back on it and knowing his driving skills, not that he wasn't safe, but just how fast he would drive, I was like, was that really wise? But he would help Clyde Seeley in the garage. Clyde always listened to country, so I guess that's how he picked it up. And so, that's just like a distinctly thing I remember, is just really liking the country music. And just like always going to the fire department. Like, we were constantly going back and forth there. We drove to Ohio in his chief car, which I'm not sure was legitimate. I don't know if you're allowed to do that, but we went to
a bit outside the jurisdiction. Okay.
Just a little bit. We went to visit one of my mom's friends who moved to Ohio in the chief car. Just like, it's all those simple things, which I hope brings some of the parents that maybe are in the chat some comfort, is like, what your kids really remember about you is not so much what you do, but the time you spend with them. Like, most of my memories are just those little simple basic things, like going to Dunkin' Donuts and him getting us a donut, and he orders a hot coffee, large, light, and sweet, like that was his coffee order, or taking us to get the deli or the pizza, just like super simple things. We loved swimming. We had a pool nearby. Anytime that Dad could join us at the swimming pool was like a huge treat, because he would, work so often. And he would put us on his knee and throw us. And like, that was just so much fun. It's just like, just all those kind of things that you remember that you love about your parents, where they're just like, they're always there for you. He worked a lot because he worked the Fire Service Academy and at the truck. It was, we didn't maybe see him as often as we would have liked, and I'm sure he would have liked. But another nice thing was our birthdays are a week apart. I'm July 12th and he's July 19th. So because so much of my family is, working in hospitals or FDNY or NYPD, we always picked a central day, and my dad and I would get to celebrate our birthdays together, which I always really enjoyed. And the dog, when we got TJ, like, that was a huge bonding experience. We'd go to a local park. Dad, there'd be some trees. Dad would be like, go hide behind the trees and have the dog go find you. Now, knowing what I know about dog training, the fact that the dog could even generally orient towards us is amazing. Not because dogs can't sniff, but because you have to teach them to do that. And he was just kind of like, yeah, just go, TJ. Just go.
Figure it out.
Figure it out. Which, to his credit, bless TJ, he did. TJ, by the way, stands for Tommy and Joanne. He named the dog after him and Mommy.
Nice.
He took it. TJ went with us to the firehouse all the time. So just like a fun dad. Like, as far as I was concerned, I had the best dad. Like, Dad shows up to get us from school in the chief car. That's always really cool. It's always super awesome. Hanging out the firehouse, watching the big job, watching them go out on the big jobs or getting to go. Always with the instruction, stay in the car, which, we never broke. We knew not to break that rule. And just fun all the time. I don't know, so many memories flood back to you all at once, but just good times, doing just simple life stuff. Just an awesome dad. Like I said, I'm going to be really biased, but I think I had the best dad in the world. I know one story I can share from my brother, who, Brian one time got to go to work with him for take your kid to work day for some reason. I don't quite remember why or how he swung it, but so it was. Brian was with Dad and some of the other guys from the truck. They were doing rappelling exercises, I believe, on the Intrepid, the aircraft carrier,
yep.
In the city. And Brian had that kind of light bulb moment of wow, what my dad does is really cool. We always knew, but we hadn't seen it reflected in anybody else yet. So Dad is rappelling off of the whatever it is that he's doing, he's rappelling. And Brian sees a younger kid who's with his dad, who's in a business suit, and the kid is looking up at my dad with this awe of oh my God. And Brian, told me, he's that's kind of the moment I realized wow, he is really cool.
My dad's different.
Well, to that, it's funny you say that. One of my fondest memories, I have two. In kindergarten, we were making Father's Day cards, and it's kindergarten. Your ability with the scissor and construction paper at this point is very limited. So they had us make a little tie cutout to put paste onto the card for Father's Day. And I remember doing it, but I also remember the time thinking my dad doesn't wear a tie to work. I didn't know how to explain to them this is not the outfit that he wears. And then to that end, I'll kind of end this paragraph of stories with probably one of my favorite stories. That it's interesting how memories sometimes will just come to you out of the blue. So when I was in elementary school, I was in the Girl Scouts, and I think it was 5th grade, so I'd be about 10. We had gotten an opportunity to do an overnight trip to the Queens Museum of Science. So we got to go to the Queens Museum of Science after it was closed, and we actually were going to sleep over there until the next morning. And we're going around the exhibits. We see them dissect like the cow eye, and we look at the lamb, and we're doing all this kind of stuff. And like we're unrolling our sleeping bags to get ready to go to sleep, and I hear my name. And so I turn and I look and I see my dad in the lobby, which looking back, I don't know, it makes complete sense how he got in. Like he's in his ESU uniform. He probably went to the guy like, hey, my daughter's in there. Can I say goodnight? So he lets him in. But like that was my moment when I realized my dad was really cool, seeing everybody else's reaction. Because I hear my name, I see him there, like it's so picturesque too. Like he's under the museum lights, like his hair is illuminated by the light from above the gray. I very rarely got to see him in his ESU uniform because most of the guys change when they get into work. There's no sense driving in your full uniform. So I'm taking in his uniform, like his gun belt, the patches. I remember it really distinctly, like this voluminous set of keys on his key belt, on his gun belt. Mm-hmm. And I was looking at a bunch of them, and some of them had really strange tips and ends to them. And I'm looking at them and I said, Dad, like, what are these for? And he goes, they open the subway doors. If they had to get into the subways, if the doors were locked, if they had to effect a rescue, or the gates that go beyond the tunnels, that's what they're for. And I was asking him about a whole bunch of other stuff, and then he gave me a really big hug and told me good night. And I was just like, my dad is the coolest. Like that was so, and it was really, as an adult too, that's really touching to me because, Mom must have told him that I was doing this sleepover at the Queens Museum of Science. Not only did he remember, because dads are busy. Not only did he remember, but he he found and took the time to come and get in and say goodnight to me, which was huge. And so it's a memory I'll treasure forever.
Oh, naturally. And, you warmed my heart when you said Dunkin' Donuts thing, because that was me with my grandfather who passed away last year at 86. One of the things when he would pick me up from school was we would stop by Dunkin' Donuts, and he'd get his coffee and I'd get my old fashioned. And it was a simple thing. We'd go back home, we'd have the donut, he'd have his coffee. But, it meant the world to me, and it still does. I'm 24 years old, and it still means a lot to me. And that's a memory I'll carry with me for as long as I live. So with parents, grandparents, whatever it is, it's the little things, because look at all these years later, we're both full grown adults in different chapters of our lives. But when we harken back to those moments, we become those kids again. And it's a beautiful, happy thing. It's a beautiful, happy thing.
I think that's why he's one of my dad is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. And it's why my brother in some capacity and I are very close, because anybody who has kids who grew up in the volunteer firefighting world or police world, like you get this world, you understand it. But most of the children I interacted with as I grew up through, elementary, middle school, and high school didn't have this life. So it did not make a lot of sense to them as to why I'm so passionate about I love the sound of fire trucks. I love hearing sirens. Seeing them go by makes me really excited. Yeah. Like it doesn't necessarily indicate calamity in my mind. If I see an ambulance, I always try to do a little, God be with you to the person inside, but they're exciting for me. I really enjoy them. I mean, to this day, I made the guy at the car dealership where I got my car the other week laugh because I had the scanner radio app up and it came up on the car's like multi display. And he's like, what is that? And I was like, yeah, I listen to the scanner when I'm going to my mom's house. He was just like, of course. I like,
Why don't you listen to the scanner?
Why?
Who even are you?
Right? Who are you? What are you doing with your life? Like, of course I listen to the scanner. I love that is a soothing sound to me. I love that noise. I like the sound of the siren. Like I said, like sirens to me, I love that. Brian and I, when we were little, invented a game where we would try to guess what kind of rig was coming based on the siren, which fire trucks are always a dead giveaway because they're much lower and they have the air horn. It's always the police cars and the ambulances that are a little trickier to deduce. Yes, I love fire trucks. But just like, oh my God. Like if I'm on the city, I'm sure the firefighters like in the FDNY are like, what, like they're like, this girl must be like touched. Because like I'll see them and I'll wave, and I'm like, I'm gonna be 35 in July. So they're like I'm just like, hi.
That's Eddie Lutz saying Tom always had a blue handkerchief around his neck during the summer. He gave me one. I still have it. I think Eddie was a truck 3 guy who I really want to come on the show, by the way, Eddie. Just saying, love Eddie, good man. But it's the same thing. Like, my current job, like I kind of lucked into that job doing the social media for the fire department. And I kid you not, every time I hear the engine take off and I get to go with the guys on boxes, And most of the time I'm usually riding with the captain on the way to these boxes. I'm like a 5-year-old. I don't say anything. I know better because I know the captain's got to do his size up. He's thinking about operations, so I'm dead quiet. But at the inside, I'm like,
I know you're just giddy.
I've never lost that. So I'm like, I'm laughing. I'm like, we're so much alike. Doesn't matter how old you get.
I think too, it in a weird way, I think it ruined like an adrenaline rush for me for the rest of my life. Because when I was little, that's what gave me an adrenaline rush. Was like we got the lights and sirens on in the chief's car. We're weaving in and out of traffic. Like we're going really fast. Like that was that must have been an adrenaline rush. I've never had it since. I even played rugby, and post rugby games, I didn't get the same situation. It was like only in the fire truck with the lights and the sirens. Like that's when it hits. Like that's what I need. I would not change my life for anything. It's just too awesome. I love it too much. I don't care if people don't necessarily understand. I'm like, it makes me happy. That's really all that matters.
It's not hurting anybody.
Sure not.
Anybody. I mean, we're buffs with the capital B. I mean, I'm the same way because I'll give you a funny story. December, I was buffing my department scanner and a job comes over the air for a box alarm in one of the districts that they respond to, mutual aid. And mom had said, hey, can you run an errand for me to the store around the corner real quick? I'm like, yeah, sure, mom. So I'm getting ready up here to head out. And I'm like, no. And she's like, what's wrong? I'm like, I'm missing a fire.
That would have been me. I mean, to that end, it's to be fair, I also did learn, like, that was a very common place in the Langone proper household. So Grandma Sheila, God rest her soul, the family matriarch, we had a scanner. She had a scanner in the house probably from the time of like Grandpa Paul, at least the late 80s. It's like an ancient looking scanner, but we had it programmed all the stuff. And she lives close enough to the firehouse in Roslyn that you could hear the siren, the big air tone go off. So there are many a time we'd be having pizza at Grandma Sheila's house. Dad might be at work, so would Uncle Peter, but the rest of us would be there. We'd be having pizza. We hear the tone in the distance, and then Grandma goes, turn on the scanner. Because like now we want to, like, we know something's going to happen. We want to hear what it is. So, it's, to me, it's the part and parcel of being a Langone. I take great pride in that part of my identity. It's nice to have everybody's last name means something. Everybody's last name has a history, but mine has a very particular, special kind of history to it that I'm very proud of. So to me, part and parcel of being Langone means you must have a scanner and you must listen to it.
It's part of the family. If you don't have a scanner, like I said earlier, who even are you? And I got
right. What are you doing?
What are you doing? What is your purpose? This is all three of you.
Yes.
Which I love.
I think that it looks to be summer, so I don't think it's Brian's birthday. Brian has to be like 3 or 4 maybe in this picture. I must be like 5 or 6. And that's a fun one. That's in our backyard. And there's like that very famous half-cocked smile, and I can tell you it's a Roslyn Rescue shirt that he's wearing because I can see the edge of the Maltese cross. And I know those are the only shirts that he owned, was like PD or FD shirts, literally the only ones. Yeah, it was probably like a family party. It might have been a birthday of some form, or maybe like 4th of July, something, but just like a good time. And like, again, you can see like how massive his hands are compared to us. So like when we were little, I mean, you literally were looking up to him, but you couldn't also help but look up to him, emotionally, and just want to make him proud and not want to disappoint him. If we did ever, of course, kids do stuff that's wrong. If we did, he was not very, again, very fair and diplomatic about it. He was not a yeller. He was not prone to like big outbursts of emotions. I would also imagine having people lie to your face as part of your profession makes you really adept at dismantling a 5-year-old's lies because, it's not the same caliber. But it would just be like kind of the same. The explanation would be, here's what you did was wrong, like why it was wrong. This is why we don't do it. These are the consequences that come because you did this. And we're not going to do this again, right? No. But on the other side, it made me a very, I think, moral and capable adult because, you understand consequences. And he used those as the natural teacher of things. Like, these are the if you do something, there are consequences. There are good and bad, and these are, if you make bad choices, there will be bad consequences, and this is what happened. Also, when we would watch Trauma Life in the ER, sometimes putting the fear of God in your kids is an effective way to teach them. And what I mean by that was, we'd watch you'd see a kid in head traction because they didn't wear a helmet, and my dad would just go, "That's why you wear a helmet when you ride a bike," very calmly. With it, not a lot of fanfare, just kind of let the image do the talking. That's why you wear a helmet when you ride a bike. Or somebody's really jacked up on the hospital bed because they didn't wear a seatbelt. That's why we wear a seatbelt in the car. It's that's all we needed. We were got it. To this day, I will wear a helmet.
Childhoods.
Yeah, to this day, if I ride a bike. If I ride a bike to this day, I'm wearing a helmet. Like,
Same
to
thing.
me, it's not negotiable.
Same thing.
But I'm grateful for these things. I'm grateful. I
course.
think he was, the one way I would sum up to is I think one thing my dad was very wise and keyed into about a parent is that when you're a parent, you're always teaching. Like your kids are always learning from you, whether or not it's a deliberate lesson, like how do we find the perimeter for a fence, but they learn by watching what you do. One other quick little memory I do have is kids do also tend to be really literal, which I definitely was as a kid. So, when you're a kid, especially a kid in the 90s, like stranger danger was like the big, overarching PSA of our time. So I took that really literally as like, if we don't know you, you are a stranger, therefore you're danger. Like I was very shy. If I didn't know you, I was shy. If I did, Dad one time left us with one of the retired guys at the fire department, which you can probably appreciate from this podcast and video right now, where Daddy got back and the gentleman goes to my father. He said, Tommy, your daughter could talk the ear off of a brass monkey. So sorry. But one thing as an example of you're teaching your kids, whether it's a definitive lesson or not, we went to get gas or something somewhere like local in town. And my dad had like a working Spanish vocabulary. I would not say he was fluent by like any stretch of the imagination, but by working in the city and around other folk, like you pick up the phrases you need to know to help people out.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe some gentleman in a combination of like English and Spanish basically was like, I need a ride to the train station. Can you help me out? And something like that. I was in the car, so I'm not sure how it all broke down. What I do remember is Dad walks back with this guy and puts him in the front seat of the chief car. Now, Dad is totally calm and has the situation completely like under control. I, however, being like 7, and again, stranger danger, am freaking out internally because I'm like, there is a stranger in the car. Like, we don't do that.
Whose man's is this?
Right. Who does this human belong to and why is he in our car? But Dad has it. As a side note, back in the 90s, prior to several different events, if you were off duty, you could get a permit to carry an off-duty weapon, an off-duty sidearm. So my dad did have a revolver that he carried on him at all times if he wasn't on duty. So I think that maybe lent some extra security to him in that situation. If for some reason it went crazy, I also trust his assessment of the situation because nothing happened. But this is just how children tend to operate. You're literal stranger danger. Oh my God, who is this person? Why is he in our car? So we're driving. I'm in the back kind of like this, like what's happening? What's going on? What are we doing? Why is this man here? And then we get to the train station in Mineola and he drops him off and he just goes, see guys, that's why it's good to speak Spanish. We're just like, okay. To that end, I did end up taking Spanish in elementary school and through the rest of my high school career. But like, I think ultimately, once I got older and was able to put aside the like, no, you were never in any danger. You just have a tendency towards anxiety. It was that idea of like, if you're able to help somebody and it's within your means and capacity to do it, you help them was the lesson.
Right. Well, of course, anytime you can extend a helping hand, whatever the case may be. And that's one of the things, again, we had the same childhood because my mom, especially me being Hispanic, half Dominican, half Puerto Rican, like I said earlier, she's like, learn it because it's going to help you if not only if you want a good job someday, but in part of my job is outreach. And we have a huge Spanish community where I work in Connecticut. So it's a big part of it as well. And I have one more family photo here, and this is you and him on a railroad, which I love.
Railroad Museum. Railroad Museum.
Yep.
Yeah, you know what's funny too, Brian? I mean, I don't think my brother's 3 hours behind because he's in California. Brian, for part of the reason I'm so happy in this photo, because anybody with a sibling, you know how it is. Brian was having a fit this day. Like for what he was young, like for what, kids, sometimes you just get in moods and like, there's no consoling you and you're just having a fit. So Brian was in a fit and did not want to take that photo. So I'm like extra happy because I get to take the photo alone with Dad. So that's why I'm like, hey.
He's having a moment.
I think Mom is like trying to soothe him off camera, and I'm just like, yes, living my best life. Hi, I'm the good one right now.
I get it. I'm a younger brother. I have a sibling who's 6 years older.
Yes, I am the oldest by 2 years. It's me and Brian.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, so my sister will be 30 in a few weeks, and which I love teasing her about. And like I said earlier, I'm 24. And so the other day, it still goes on. We're both full-grown adults, mind you. She's like, you're so annoying. And I look at her dead serious. I'm like, that's my job.
Yes, I'm the younger brother. I'm supposed to be annoying.
Exactly. I'm like, what else do you think I'm here for? So I get it completely. And shout out to your brother if he is watching. And I got a couple firefighter photos of your dad before I get to more of the ESU ones. And one of them is right here.
Yes. So it's hard to tell. Like, look at me looking like an old lady. Like, peeking at the screen. I know he's some kind of level officer in this. Like his general hat is black, so he's not lieutenant or chief yet. This also could have been in the between the time he was chief, because there was a period of time where he was the training officer, but he wasn't chief or the second assistant chief. This also, judging by the front of the helmet, this is probably Roslyn Rescue. I don't think this is at the Fire Service Academy. But, you know, it's just a myriad of jobs. Thankfully, fires, especially on Long Island, are fairly rare, especially as things become more fireproof, which is great. You know, we don't want fires hurting people or destroying homes. But I do have, you know, and you probably remember as well, that distinct smell of like charred wood and water and smoke that would kind of waft through the house after the really big fires. So, yep, again, that super serious business face. Like, we have our gear on, we are working. This is no time for shenanigans. Don't quite remember what job this is, but clearly it's a big one because you got soot on him. So there's that one.
And then we got, of course, Main Street, which is one of the photos I most remember of him as well. On the roof doing extrication. I think one of the guys was telling me he was actually yelling down, "I could use some help up here."
Yeah, so again, irritated face, because he's like, now is not like he's not gonna mince words right now. It's just like, exactly, like, you know, you have to love too. Like, there's a ladder. Like, clearly the roof is not straight anymore. You see that it's like partly dived in, you know, whether it's because they're doing overhauling or, you know, and there's smoke billowing out behind him. Like, and only my father would calmly be sitting on a burning roof, you know, looking down and just kind of
That's the main thing for me too. I'm like, he's very calm.
Like, he's extremely calm. He's functionally like in the roof as well. He's like half sitting, half in the roof, and just like, yes, I get some help up here? This video too, if you ask any of my mother's friends and their husbands, this video of the Main Street fire made several rounds on multiple TVs at multiple people's homes because my father was so thrilled about it. Granted, devastating that it destroyed a bunch of property, and it was a restaurant. It was in a historic part of Roslyn. It was a very, you know, big fire, mutual aid, multiple alarms. He was so proud of this video. I cannot tell you how many times I saw this video of this fire. He's like, yeah, and then this is burning, and then that's this guy, and his name is this, and he's from this department, and this is this guy, and that's me up there, and I'm asking why nobody's helping me, telling me, can I get some help up here? And just like breaking it down for people. And this happened a lot, where it was just like, we're just taking it on a tour. Like, anytime we're visiting somebody, you have a VHS player, great, like, we're watching the Main Street fire.
And there you go. Listen, it was a job to be proud of, and every fireman has jobs like that, which I've heard a bunch of on this podcast at different points in their career. Here he is a chief. He is a chief. I think he's teaching here. Is this a job?
No, I believe this is a job.
Okay.
I pulled this one out of a binder. The one upside to my dad too is he kept meticulous notes on a lot of these jobs. So if I remember the post-it correctly, this is 1988. This was a large fire, and he's assisting a woman who's become unconscious due to smoke inhalation. And you know, you can even see in this photo like how young he is. This is like he's like in his mid to late 20s if he's chief of rescue at this point. So but I like the if you like contrast this with the photo just before where it was like the irritated face of like, what are you doing, like, get up here. This face it's like a tender concern. Like, you know, he's like checking behind him, like, what are you guys doing, like, where is the oxygen? Like, I need this stuff, but you can tell the focus is still on the patient and assisting her. And this is a photo I really enjoy.
No, me too. It's a great photo indeed. And like you said earlier, I mean, especially us being adults now and me being around the age he was when he was a chief, I'm like, I literally joke with my mom, like, I just learned how to make scrambled eggs not even 3 years ago consistently. And this man was running a whole fire department. Like, what am I doing in my life?
But I was, let's see. So I was born in 1989. So my dad was 20. If I remember my birth certificate correctly, my dad was 26 when I was born. Like, again, I was 26 about 10 years ago. I was no. There wouldn't be not be being a parent on top of being the leading officer of a full fire department and going into the police academy and doing that. Like, some people are just cut from a different cloth.
Yeah, and then that was definitely the case with your father and uncle, and that's perfectly segues into, again, one of my favorite photos. By this time, Pete is in Squad 252, which was a special operations and still is a special operations command squad of the FDNY amongst the 8 they have. And of course, there's your dad. This is such an awesome photo. I love the rig too.
Yeah, I love that it's an old one. I love that they're both smiling because I'm sure, as my Aunt Joanne can tell you, both of my father and my Uncle Peter, as I've mentioned several times, not huge or very prone to smiling in photos unless there's a reason to smile about. But I love that it does kind of show the brotherly bond. Like they're both really proud of the uniforms they're wearing. They're happy to be together. It's just a nice, really nice photo of them together, as brothers. Um, it's a great. I sometimes call this the famous photo because this one got circulated a lot post September 11th, for good reason. It's a great photo of the two of them together. But yeah, it's because they worked in different boroughs. They had different schedules. My Uncle Peter also had a landscaping business, a really successful one that he ran at home on Long Island when he wasn't working, and that was kind of his baby and his project that he did. My dad was doing stuff with the fire service academy and the fire department. So they didn't there wasn't a ton of time where they got to overlap and be in the same place just because their jobs took them to different places at different times. So it's nice to have a picture where they're both together and they're both really, really happy in it. And I think this would make Grandpa Paul very proud too.
And here he is with his other brother, and I love this photo too.
Yes, the man, the myth, the legend, the deputy commissioner of knowledge, Steph, my brother. Yes, I love this photo too because, again, Dad doesn't smile for no reason, and the look on his face there is definitely one of affection. And granted, I'm a little bit better versed in the body language of animals than in people, but just the closeness, the deliberate pulling him in to be close to him kind of pose there is, to me, that speaks volumes about how much he cared about and trusted Steph. This is somebody he genuinely enjoys the company of. And I love this photo for many, many reasons.
Right, right. And it's not, I mean, the old NYPD ESS truck at the back, it's truck 7, I can tell here. And also just Steph looks hilarious in this photo. Seeing Steph with hair is interesting too. But
I
also
was
he
gonna
just
say
looks
that.
he looks flat out hilarious. I mean, I didn't know he wore glasses, but it almost looks like he has his eyes closed. He looks like a happy little kid. He really does.
Yeah, I feel, that's very likely kind of the I think it was, again, it was a very brotherly relationship where it was, Dad had a great affection and a great fondness for Steph. Loved to rib on him and be ribbed on by him. And actually just seeing that and saying that sparked a memory again. Just keep getting flashes of these. So obviously the history and the love of pranking one another in ESU is well known. Obviously happens in the FD2. But so Dad used to take his chief car when he had it to the truck because that was basically his daily driver. So that's what he brought to the truck. And they obviously have the key rack where they put up all their keys for their cars, their personal vehicles up on the wall. And Steph told me that he had made a habit of, because sometimes my dad worked the 4 to 12 shift. So, he'd get out at about, give or take, about midnight. So Steph would, at one point in the night, invariably take the keys to the chief car, go in, turn it into the on mode, turn on all the lights, set the sirens up to go off, and then would turn it off really quickly before it could go. So invariably at midnight in this nice residential little neighborhood street of Flushing, it's my dad turns on the chief car and all of the lights and sirens start going off.
It's classic. And Steph's pointing out this is actually, and thanks to Steph and Eddie Lutz, this is actually truck 3. That photo was taken. Yeah, it is a 3. I mistook it as a 7 in the background. So that's truck 3 in the Bronx, where Steph was originally at the beginning of his emergency service career before he made it over. And Eddie was there too, before he made it over to truck 10, where he currently is this day. And either way, it sounds like Steph. I mean, just God.
Classic Steph.
He's still classic Steph, who I just saw not too long ago down at Floyd Bennett for ESU's graduation. Let's see if a couple more photos that I have here before I get to September 11th, 2001. And this is the photo we were talking about. This is a favorite of you.
That's my favorite. That one's my favorite. I have it printed out in 3 different sizes in my house. We have I made a little family wall where I have a bunch of my family photos are all on them. This is my favorite. To me, this just the best encapsulates my dad. You can see how thrilled he is in that photo. It's a really big smile. He's in his full uniform. He's in front of the REP with the bins open, ready to go. This to me is just the pinnacle of what Dad was about, what he loved to do, and where he loved to be. So I mean, he's also very, if I may, very handsome gentleman. So this picture certainly does him justice in that capacity. And you also have the lovely gray hair. But it's the joy in his face and just the vivacity in this photo that I really enjoy. It's definitely my favorite.
Oh yeah, it's a great photo. It's a classic photo, like I said. And again, I love everything about it. I love the REP. I love the uniform. He looks very squared away, and he was a very squared away guy, as Sophie says, the third herd. And that is the case down for Truck 3 in the Bronx, and also Truck 4 too in their third squad. I've had a few of those guys on the show, and again, great guys to talk to. I'll display the photos of your father on that morning, momentarily, but just briefly touching on it. He was working that morning, September
Yes.
11th, 2001, as was his partner, Paul Talty, as was Steph and Richie Winwood. It's the day tour. So did he normally work day tours in ESU, or was he a mixture of everything?
I think it was a mixture of everything. I believe I asked my mom this question ages ago. I think it was a mix. It was probably like the it was probably a mix because when he would teach at the fire service academy, that was like the mid like the mid evening. It would be like 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, so it would necessitate having a day tour to be able to get there in time. Sometimes it was the 4 to 12s. He just I think in the early 90s, it was more the later shifts, more the 4 to 12s. And then I think as Brian and I got older and my mom was working in like a private doctor's office, that he started to rotate some of the shifts. So sometimes it was day tours, sometimes it was night tours. But yeah, so it ended up toward the end of the career, it ended up being a mix of the shifts.
Hmm. And so the call comes in at 8:46, and by now everyone, of course, knows the story. And undoubtedly, much like 1993, any vehicle with a light and siren on it in New York City is heading down to this. And your father hopped in the 10 truck and got down there. And I'll let you piece your version, or because you have the best version of all of step by step what he did that morning.
Right. So, as far as I understand it, Paul's wife Barbara was in the middle taking classes for teaching. So she was at Queens College, and she had phoned Paul and asked if they could swing by and get textbooks for her, drop textbooks or something like in that capacity, where they were in the vicinity of Queens College when they get the call in. And Paul was still, I think, relatively newish to the unit. He hadn't been in there for decades like Dad had. But if you know my father and A, his knowledge of New York City geography, B, his penchant for driving like he was a member of NASCAR, and C, his love of getting to any emergency as soon as possible and to be first on scene, means that he probably drove about like Mach 7 down God knows what kind of back streets, side streets, and all sorts of shortcuts from Queens to Manhattan, because obviously the parkways would have been slammed. So they get there together. They suit up, they get ready to go in. I know at one point they run into Steph, Hargrove, and Winwood, who arrived probably not too long after. You see, this is like when I reflect on this photo, this is the most serious face I've ever seen my dad have. And as Eddie had mentioned, the blue bandana is actually, you can see that around his neck, just kind of peeking out above this SCBA pack. This is the most serious I've ever seen him. When I first saw this photo too, I also knew they were close to the scene because the street sign behind them says Vesey Street is the cross street. So they are like right by, the thick of it all, and they're getting ready to go in. So they run into Hargrove, Winwood, and Steph. I believe he poached a bunch of rescue line or rope line from them, trying to figure out some way, like, would we need rope? Do we have to rappel out of somewhere? Do we need rope to like hoist or lower people? He grabbed a bunch of that. As serious as he is, and I'm sure in his mind he's breaking down tactically and from a rescue sense what needs doing, what the priorities are, where to go, what to do, how to best affect this. I'm also sure to a certain extent a tiny bit of him was excited because this is a huge job. I can't imagine a person on earth who wasn't a little bit afraid that day. So I'm sure that lends to the seriousness of this. This is not only is this the biggest job and it's exciting to be a part of it, but this is a huge job and a lot of people are depending on us. And what we're looking at right now is functionally a war zone. Like there's the business face, like we are ready to go. Like he's already got all his stuff on, he's just, you can tell he's just waiting for a second for Paul to catch up and then like they're going to be gone. So I know Kenny Winkler, I believe, wanted him to possibly affect the roof rescue as well, but he got assigned to, I want to say it was Sergeant Coughlin's team to go into Tower 2. Possibly some of my memories on this stuff is a little fuzzy, but the long and short of it is he's assigned a rescue team. He's assigned to go into Tower 2. He and Paul are part of that team. They get to Tower 2. As far as my mother and I's understanding go, they were on or around the 20th floor of the South Tower when it collapsed. And as far as what I was going through that day, nowhere near as exciting as some of the, stories from those on the ground. So I'm, several tens of miles away in my middle school class on Long Island. I'm 12. I'm in homeroom. So with my favorite teacher, I remember this really distinctly. I mean, this is, one of those days you remember every detail about that day. I remember knowing something was up, not just because the principal came into our classroom with a letter, but because my teacher was normally really smiling and very upbeat and just like a really jovial person. And when the principal came in and like they talked amongst themselves with the letter, like every trace of joy from her face was gone. So being kind of trained to be an observant kid, I was like, something is up. So then they read us the letter, two planes have struck the World Trade Center in Manhattan. And that's kind of where they left it. My teacher, I don't even know if we had the ability to have cable. She did not turn on the television, which was probably really wise for a classroom of 12-year-olds, but she did not turn it on. So I went through most of my school day having no real sense of like the magnitude of this, like the towers had collapsed. Like I was kind of like in a bubble of a lack of information at that point. I don't know what other kids had heard in their various homerooms, but as far as mine went, like we got very little information. Just this thing has happened, and then invariably I was like, well, Dad is there. It's a humongous job. Like he must be there. It's part and parcel of him. So around lunchtime, there is a girl who's at my lunch table who we're not friendly. We're not friendly for any poor reason. We're not mean to each other or anything like that. Like we just don't run in the same circle. But the reason I bring that up is she was very, very, very upset. She was crying a lot. And I managed to work out that her dad worked for Kenneth Fitzgerald. So he was like on the 104th or the 106th floor of the North Tower. I am unsure of what information she had at that point, but she was like inconsolable. And, probably from my upbringing and just hopefully just being a decent person, I felt really bad seeing her that upset. And I just felt so bad. So I went over to her and I said, Mary Ellen, don't worry. People like my dad are going to be coming. Like they'll go into the towers. They're going to rescue, people who are stuck there. They're going to bring them out. Like, try not to worry. Like nobody's going to leave them alone. Like people, like they're coming, rescue is coming. I don't know how much she had seen, because from the little bit of knowledge that I had at that point, everything I was saying was like legitimate, I knew they would be coming. I just had no idea how bad it was. So it wasn't until I got home and like everybody else turned on the TV that I got to finally see what had happened. But I think at 12, it was hard to like fully absorb the magnitude of what had happened. I was like, yes, there's buildings that are down. Like, yes, paper is falling everywhere, but I don't know if it's just youth. I don't know if it's like a protective mechanism your brain does when you're young and you're confronted with really big things. Maybe it's just the distance that TV tends to bring naturally when you're looking at something through a screen that's happening over there. I was like, okay, this is big. Dad's probably fine. Like we're good. Everything's, it's going to be busy. So I just kind of like went about doing my homework and stuff like we normally do. My mom was concerned by the like 9 o'clock or so in the evening that we hadn't heard from Dad. I was like, Mom, well, one of the cell phone towers I heard the people say was on top of the tower. So, the cell phone service is probably out and he probably can't get to a phone. It's really crazy, because this is like the first time cell phones are really in use. So I'm like, he's probably just really busy. So then I go to bed. What Mom told me way later many years later is at midnight that night, Randy Miller, who was my dad's like pretty steady partner in ESU, had come to the door and told her that Tommy was missing when they did the roll call. And then she went to One Please Plaza at that point and kind of like got more information. But as far that, my mom was kind of like, we'll wait and see. And then Grandma Sheila really kind of spearheaded this, like, we're not making any kind of decisions or assumptions until we get official news. And Grandma Sheila kind of like was the real matriarch on that and landed it. And then it was just like a couple of weeks of like, we're waiting, a lot of waiting at Grandma Sheila's house, a lot of, FD guys and ESU guys coming through, Grandma feeding them. It's just like trying to, and do anything she could for them. And them being like, we're digging, we're looking, there's air pockets, there are voids. My Aunt Joanne actually joked, she's like, if anybody is gonna survive, she's like, it's gonna be Tommy. And my Aunt Joanne goes, he's down there with a peach of chalk in a little crawl space with a schematic of to everybody else on how we're gonna get out of here. And then it became a lot of like, we're looking, we're digging, and then just it sort of became apparent as the weeks kind of turned into almost a month that it was likely like they're not coming back, Uncle Peter and Daddy. So it was like October 26th is when we had the joint funeral at the church in my hometown together. And, that's when I think it started to make the most sense because there were lots of memorials in between that time. Brian and I, we went to the on-site medical examiner's office that was near Ground Zero and to give swabs of DNA in case there was, anything recovered to see if they could match it. Just like a whirlwind of stuff that just like is almost too large to comprehend when you're that young. It's stuff I made a lot more sense of as I got older. And that was like really the time I got to spend the most time with his work colleagues. Steph became the NYPD's liaison to our family, so we developed a really tight bond with him. I think one of Steph's fondest memories of Brian and I is my brother and I arguing over the details of one of my dad's jobs, a jumper job, and we were arguing like, no, it was this one that was in the Bronx. He's like, I'm not talking about that, and we're arguing about it in the back of the truck. So, that's where I got to become more intimate and more familiar with this world that he existed so in such a large part of that, we were not super involved in just by the very nature of the work and the distance in Queens. And then, we had the NYPD missing man formation go by, and like, that's when it kind of started to make sense of like, no, this is like really real. This is what has happened. My Uncle Peter and my father still to this day have not been recovered. What we have of my dad is the top of his Glock that he was issued that he bought after graduating the police academy and his handcuffs. Interesting side note though, his handcuffs that we have that were recovered with him or recovered in the vicinity of are his original handcuffs from the police academy, which I know I know a lot of cops end up losing their original set, through like prisoner transfers or whatever.
Naturally.
But they trace the serial number to like they're the original ones. So we have those. And that's kind of like that's the functional story of the day and month of and we just kind of you just got to keep going. Anybody who's a firefighter or cop family member or child, spouse of, it's while we may not sign up for the job, when you love this person and you accept this part of them, you accept that this is a potential inevitability of the line of work that they chose. However, for me, what has made going through this process, at least for me, much easier is one, my dad was doing the thing he loved to do the most on the face of this earth. He did probably the best rescue he's ever done. And he made an incredible impact on the lives of many, many people, people who I'll never know about or never meet, but he managed to save, which is tremendous and huge in its own right. What I find really comforting stories, like he, even without September 11th, if he had left us in a different way, the legacy and the stories that he has behind ensure that he'll never be forgotten, which is not a concern I ever have. I know he's a very well-loved and revered part of the ESU family. And just the way that my family operates, like we always would tell stories anyway. So I find the stories for me are very healing. They're a great way to talk about somebody in the best of them. It's the way they lived, not how they died. That's important,
exactly.
Right? Which you mentioned that a lot, which I think is really poignant and very pertinent. It's I can't think of any way to take it but find a comfort in all of the good works he did over his entire life and all the people's lives he's touched, people he's helped save, all those kinds of things. Like that to me was a bigger comfort. Like, yes, of course, there were periods of like great anger or just, grief of just like, why would this happen? But I just ended up moving on to probably as close to a place of acceptance as you can at this point. Because as my father would say, or my mom is fond of saying, like, it is what it is. Like, this is what has happened. There's no point playing a what if game. It's a very the what if game is a so to speak a dangerous game to play because you just fall in a hole where you could just like kind of re-traumatize yourself. So like it is what it is. Like this is what has happened. He's an incredible person who will never be forgotten. There, just even by the comments alone, there's a lot of people, which is important. I kind of took up the mantle of like, hey, I'm going to talk about him to anybody who will listen, which is how I, kind of got, like there was a Newsday article and the children of 9/11. And my motivation for that was twofold. One was my dad's incredible. Everybody should know about him. Like you could call that like a little bit of a selfish reasoning, but like, hey, look at this incredible guy. I think he deserves to be talked about. And the other part for me was I wanted, kind of like Joe Public to understand better about the NYPD's role in September 11th. That there were brave officers on the ground who were evacuating folk. There were officers doing, crowd control, traffic control, and that's all really important. But that there were also officers who went into the buildings, who went to effect a rescue because of their expertise. And, I didn't want their part of this day to be forgotten. I wanted people to have more of an appreciation for the multifaceted kind of role that they play and what they do. And yeah, that's kind of the nitty gritty of the worst part, the worst day.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you going into detail on it. And I can't remember the article. I think it might have been Newsday, but I'm not sure. Don't hold me to it. Where I think Mrs. Langone commented that she heard, I guess there were several people who mentioned they saw a gray-haired emergency service cop that were able to get out of Tower 2 and lift the telltale. And that's the thing. I'm glad you mentioned there's a lot of people he impacted because and I'm just stating the obvious here, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people walking around right now that were in the South Tower that, quite frankly, are still with us today because of your dad.
Yeah,
No doubt
I
in my
mean,
mind.
I don't doubt it either. I think, if you look at the community, say of like 9/11 survivors and family members, there's like something like 3,000 odd kids that, like my brother and I technically fall under that purview, who are like 18 and under when they lost their parent on September 11th. And I always felt, it's going to sound very strange to use the word lucky, but I feel like y'all will understand. I always felt lucky in the sense that Dad was part of the NYPD, that Uncle Peter was part of the FDNY, because we had a built-in large family ready to go, ready to support us, who, by the very nature of their work, have the unfortunate need to have preparations in place for a line of duty death. That there are mechanisms that start to kick on immediately when these things happen, versus somebody who, is an office worker, who the term line of duty death doesn't exist in their job description because it shouldn't. And their person's worst crime was that they showed up to work one day and then this happened. It was the way I see it as well, at the end of the day, functionally, my dad, my Uncle Peter, and anybody else who came to the job that day did have a choice to go in. For many of them, it would be a no-brainer, and they would almost say it like, they wouldn't say they had no choice, but it would just be like, not going is not an option. But if you think about it on the realistic sense, they had a choice to be like, I'm not going in. He had a choice to go, and he made the decision to do that. And being his family and loving him, and by extension what he does, we accept that decision as well. And for me, again, that makes it easier to accept, easier to deal with than somebody who, again, they just showed up to work and then this thing happened to them, and it would not be part of any of their wildest dreams. Like my classmate's dad, who just showed up to work at Cantor Fitzgerald, like that was the worst thing he did. That wasn't a choice, that none of those people had choices. And that so many of those people, I think to a certain extent, I feel like, sadly get forgotten in a way, except for the name readings, it's their lives were meaningful in their own ways. Like all of those lives had meaning. They all mattered. Every single one of those persons, from people who worked at Windows of the World, maintenance people, window washers, the highest executive, whoever, they all matter.
The innocent passengers on the planes.
Right. All of those people matter. And I think it makes me very sad that in some ways the only time that they're remembered is at the name readings, and it's only a tiny glimmer of their name and a little picture and maybe the blurb that the person reading gets to say about them, and then that's kind of it. So that's kind of another reason I feel very lucky that Dad and Uncle Peter, served and in the capacity that they had to leave us, were at least part of something so much larger than themselves, and that by its very nature ensures they'll never be forgotten.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's again perfectly put because I recall two lines came to mind as you were mentioning that about the choice of going in. Walter Brethel, who was a fire captain that day, and one of the 343 that did not survive it, said to his men before they went in, "Gentlemen, this is going to be the worst day of our lives. If you don't want to go in with me, I understand." They all went in with him. They all went in with him,
Right.
and the other one was Kenny Winkler, not on this show, but an interview he did with 511 Tactical. Kenny, as you know, is a very stoic man. He
Yeah.
doesn't really express a lot of emotion. That's not me knocking him. That's just who he is, which is why he was such a good E-man. But he got emotional when the interviewer was asking him, about the collapses. He's like, listen, I think if those guys knew that the buildings were going to come down when they did, and his voice was breaking as he said it, they just would have worked faster. I don't think it would have stopped the mission. They just would have worked faster.
Yeah.
That sums up in a nutshell the spirit of a first responder, the spirit of ESU.
The reason I'm chuckling is it's that name. My dad's nickname of being Captain Adrenaline comes to mind. Is like that's exactly it. Like if he knew he had
Yeah.
a time limit, he would have just worked faster. He would have just been like, well, now we have this much time. Like we have to get like it has to get done. I don't think it would have stopped them in any capacity. I mean, especially not somebody who like legitimately loved finding and getting all of the big jobs over his career. Avianca, the first bombing, Oklahoma City, various other large jobs that maybe just don't technically fit the moniker of big jobs.
Right.
He would have just worked faster. Like that's 100% correct. And I don't think it would have stopped them. And I mean, you don't have a career in, the first yeah, I think he's right. He would not have stopped till he got on the roof. He would have just been like,
Yep,
I'm
I
gonna
think
keep
he's dead on
going.
the money. Yeah.
Um, being a firefighter since 1980, so that's 21 years being a firefighter.
Yep.
84. Oh, my math is terrible. We're gonna say like, what is it, 18, give or take?
17.
Thank you. Math is not my strong suit. Like nearly 2 decades in ESU. Like you will likely have confronted the specter of death a bunch of times, whether it be a
Mhm.
tactical job, where somebody, it's just sometimes it's just that sheer dumb luck, that it pans out one way and not another. You don't face those situations multiple times over a career and keep coming back if you have not, in effect, made peace with that possibility of your job. And one person I was close to earlier in my life made a really good point that my dad also worked really hard in the way he did, and whether he planned to or not, ended up passing in such a way where our family, Brian and mom and I, were taken care of after he was gone. That
Oh yeah.
losing him didn't cause massive economic instability or change the way that we had to live. In terms of our routine and our day to day. He managed to do something like mom gets his getting the pension when you're in line of duty death and having those kinds of things where he set it up in a way where you would be able to keep us taken care of. And that's really important. And Brian and I are, anybody who knows him is a living legacy of him. My mother keeps all his stories. My brother and I, not just literally are half of him, but who we are as people. I like to tell people the best parts of me are my mother, or what my mother and father have raised me to be. That is it. Anything else is just like maybe I got lucky and I made some good choices along the way, or I happen to like wind up the way I am. But the best parts of me are what my father and my mother have taught me.
And I think that's a testament, to a lot of people that have been lucky enough to have great parents. And you certainly have a great mom, and you certainly had a great father, and two excellent role models to grow up with. I almost forgot to play the turtle video, so I
I
didn't want to
love the
go.
turtle video.
It's 3 minutes and 48 seconds, so we will enjoy it, and we will see you right after this video. Enjoy, folks.
Emergency Service Truck 10.
Can you tell me what happened here this afternoon? With the call that you got?
Actually, two other guys from one of our units got a call for a stuck sea turtle in the mud. So they came over, they called for some assistance. More of our guys came over and found a sea turtle stuck in the mud, having a hard time keeping its head out of the mud. So we tried to get it out to sea. It didn't look like it wanted to go. And a lot of pushing and shoving, and the ocean people came over. And together we finally, with the crane, with the help of a lot of good people, I don't even know who brought the crane over. They came over, we kind of got it onto the harbor boat, got into a little deeper water, and away you went. The rest is history.
Okay, I saw you under the circumstances, the turtle was afraid and he was just wanted to get out. I saw you actually dive on top of him to try to stabilize him. What was that like for you as a rescue?
He's stronger than I am. We were worried he was going to fall off the boat with the ropes around him, and then he would drown. The ocean people told us he would drown. So we were trying to get the ropes off him real quick before he fell in tied up, and then he would drown. So I was just trying to get him off in time. I mean, it's an animal's a life, so, you know, try and do your best.
You guys did a great job.
Thank you.
Nobody else thanked you. I'd like to thank you.
No, thanks. It worked out okay.
It's awesome.
I love that video. I love that video so much.
He's very matter of fact, which I love too. He's like, "Hey, listen, all in a day's work." I just love his attitude. He had, as we talked about tonight, during the 2 hours you and I have been chatting, he had such a straightforward and humble approach to his work.
You know, it's funny too because watching him, I can almost see the fact that he was like annoyed he didn't have another word for mud other than mud.
Yeah.
I could tell by his expression. I was just like
the mire.
Yes, like the muck, the mire, yeah, I also kind of find it funny, not knocking anybody else on the boat affecting the rescue, everything done there. But you know, it's like my dad is the one who jumps on top of the turtle. My dad's the one who starts to realize like, oh, he's moving, like he's going, and he starts pulling all the stuff out, and then he's like, you know, and my dad is the one who recognizes like, okay, well, we're not going to be able to get him out much farther, so let me start pushing the boat and tip it so he gets going. I mean, they all did an incredible job together, and I also love the giant smile that comes across his face when he dives on the turtle and just like trying to hold it down. Yeah, awesome. He's just like,
I love that.
I often like to say that if anybody ever wonders where my love of animals comes from, and not just dogs, I love all creatures. That's the video. Like that's where my love of animals comes from. And that quote has always meant a lot to me with the other an animal is a life. So, you know, you try to do your best.
And there you go. And this has been, I don't even know what to say. This has been an awesome show. I am so glad that you and I collaborated for this. I'm so glad that you reached out and that we made the time for this. It was well worth it. And I think we're going to be doing more of these. And I have to credit you because you started the trend, Kate. So, man, this is a high bar. Whoever comes on next for another tribute show will have a very, very difficult bar to try to match up to. But this was a heck of a way to start. So, Kate, before we say goodbye to the audience, stick around. We'll talk off air. Any shout outs, and you can give as many as you want, my friend, to anyone or anything.
Oh yeah. Well, biggest shout outs are to my blood family, the actual Langone family. Grandma Sheila's amazing matriarch. My Aunt Joanna, my Aunt Ro are always great about sharing stories about my dad. They are invaluable vaults of stories for pre-Officer Tommy, you know, Tommy from his childhood. My mother, of course, the saint that she is. I think this whole experience taught her that she was a stronger person than I think she ever really thought she could be. My husband for tolerating my general insanity and love of all things police, fire, rescue, and his immense support for me through all of these years and times with 9/11. And then, of course, my NYPD family, first and foremost, Sarge Hargrove, may he rest in peace. Gentleman, an absolute consummate professional, and I can't think of a better boss for my dad than Hargrove, who was an incredible man. And of course, my brother, the honorary Langone, Mr. Steven Stephanakis, you know, got nothing but love for my much older brother, as it were, who took me on many a ride along post 9/11, and we got up to some fun little hijinks here and there. And the rest of the gentlemen from Roslyn Rescue, you know, there's Kenny Banner, Al Fry, and my dad. You know, anybody and everybody who's ever shared a story of his with me. I love them. Keep them coming. If you have a story and you want to share, you can find me on Facebook. I love the stories. I love them. And a shout out to you, Mr. Mike, for having the foresight to do something as important as recognizing the work of the ESU and the FDNY to make sure that their stories are put into the annals of history, that we're recording them, that they're not forgotten, and that we share that kind of love going forward with everybody. And anybody and everybody who put up with me for 2 hours and 18 minutes, I thank you too.
My shout out is to you and to the Langone family and the ESU family. And to, of course, your father and your uncle. And it's not just about, somebody said this years ago when I was doing my homework for a bomb squad show. I mentioned Detective Claude Richards off the air. There's a great scene from an EMS documentary they were shooting in the city in 95. Subway scare, suspicious package, and Detective Richards is the one that's in the bomb suit, and they take off the helmet. It's him. And one of the commenters is like, oh, wow, or that it was an oh, wow moment because it gave you a glimpse into the everyday things these guys did before they made the ultimate sacrifice. And that's why a show like this is important in your dad's case and anybody else that we do a tribute show on going forward. It's small things. It's the simple jobs that nobody thought anything about because it didn't make the newspaper all the time. But they did them and they impacted people and impacted them positively at that for the rest of their lives that we need to highlight because we know them for how they died. But tonight's show was so uplifting because we got to chronicle how Tom Langone lived and a little bit of your uncle too.
Yes.
And the times that we were able to touch on his life. So this was fantastic. Like I said, stick around. We'll talk off air. And I appreciate everyone who tuned in tonight, whether you were watching via YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitter, for those of you who will listen to this later on the audio side, or for those of you that will watch it later on. I appreciate you guys too. Coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast, I have to check here because I'm losing track, which is why it's good to have a calendar. So this interview was supposed to happen a few months ago, but he got a little busy with his current job. So we've expanded outside the FDNY scope. We're continuing our FDNY interviews, of course, but I want to get firefighters and cops from around the country because everybody's experience is different and certainly worth telling. And he was a chief in Seaside Heights, New Jersey. He was on the forefront for when they were impacted very hard by Hurricane Sandy. And that's going to be Chief James Samarelli for another volume of the Best of the Bravest Nationwide edition. And next Friday is going to be somebody who's in the chat, Chris Ebden, who was in New York City EMS, also on the fire side. So he'll be on for the Best of the Bravest Nationwide as we look back at New York City EMS pre their merger with the FDNY. For those of you that were going to listen to this on the audio side, again, we're getting into something new now. We're introducing the outro songs. This one's an ode to your father and also to Steve Stefanakis. It's the Guided by Voices Band and the official Ironman rally song that you will be hearing for those of you listening on the audio side. In the meantime, on behalf of Kate Langone, I'm Mike Colón. We will see you next time. Go Knicks, go Rangers this May. And as the E-men like to say, anytime, baby. Take care and have a great weekend, everyone. Be safe.
Feel like it's a good day's work.
Oh, yeah. We got the guy, nobody got hurt. It's a good day's work.